1. The echo of a lie. Have you ever heard a piece of information so many times that you started to believe it, even without a shred of evidence? Maybe it's a common saying, a political catchphrase, or a piece of celebrity gossip. You hear it from a friend, see it on social media, and then overhear it in a cafe. At first, you might be skeptical, but with each repetition, the claim starts to feel true. This isn't a coincidence. It's a calculated feature of human psychology. It's called the illusory truth effect, and it is one of the most powerful and dangerous cognitive biases we possess. It's the simple, chilling principle that a lie, if repeated often enough, begins to sound indistinguishable from the truth. Our brains are not high-powered supercomputers designed for constant, rigorous fact-checking. They are efficiency machines, built to conserve mental energy wherever possible. To navigate the endless stream of information we face daily, our minds rely on mental shortcuts or heuristics. One of the most fundamental of these is familiarity. When we encounter a statement for the first time, our brain has to work hard to process it, evaluate its source, and check it against our existing knowledge. But the second time we hear it, the process is a little easier. The third time, it's almost effortless. Our brain mistakes this ease of processing, this feeling of familiarity, for a sign of accuracy. It operates on a flawed but efficient logic. If I've heard this before, it's probably true. This cognitive loophole is the bedrock of modern propaganda and advertising. A political campaign doesn't need to present a detailed, fact-based argument to win you over. It just needs to repeat a simple, memorable slogan until it's etched into your mind. An advertiser knows you won't grow wings from drinking their energy drink, but by repeating the tagline "Red Bull gives you wings" relentlessly, they forge a powerful unconscious association between their product and the concept of energy Uplift. Think about common myths that persist despite being thoroughly debunked. The idea that we only use 10% of our brains is a complete fabrication, yet it's been repeated in movies and self-help books for so long that it's accepted as common knowledge. The notion that lightning never strikes the same place twice is demonstrably false. The Empire State Building is struck dozens of times a year, but the saying is so familiar it feels correct. A landmark 1977 study proved this in a clinical setting, showing that participants rated statements they had seen multiple times as more likely to be true, regardless of their actual validity. Even when we know a statement is false, studies confirm that repeated exposure can still make it feel true on an intuitive level, creating a strange cognitive dissonance where our gut feeling contradicts our logical knowledge. The defense against the illusory truth effect is not to become cynical, but to become consciously curious. The next time you hear a claim for the 10th time, especially one that evokes a strong emotional response, pause. Take a moment to ask yourself a simple but critical question. Is this familiar because it's true, or is it just familiar? By actively questioning the echo, you can begin to distinguish the sound of truth from the noise of repetition. 2. The power of the unclosed loop. Your brain hates open tabs, both on your computer and in your mind. That nagging, intrusive feeling you get when you leave a project half-finished, walk away from an unresolved argument, or can't stop thinking about a TV show's cliffhanger has a name: the Zeigarnik effect. This powerful psychological principle reveals that our minds are fundamentally wired for closure. Unfinished tasks remain highly active in our short-term memory, creating a persistent cognitive tension, a mental itch that we are desperate to scratch until the loop is closed. Completed tasks, on the other hand, are quickly dismissed from our consciousness to free up mental resources for the next challenge. It's as if our brain places a bright, flashing, incomplete tag on the task, making it impossible to ignore. This phenomenon was first identified in the 1920s by the brilliant Russian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik. While sitting in a busy Vienna cafe, she became fascinated by the waiters' incredible mental abilities. They could flawlessly recall complex, multi-item orders for large tables without writing anything down. Yet, the moment the bill was settled, they would instantly forget the details of the order. The information simply vanished. Zygarnik theorized that the unclosed loop of the pending payment kept the information at the forefront of their minds. Her subsequent laboratory research confirmed this wasn't a fluke. It's a fundamental aspect of how our memory prioritizes information. This discovery challenged the simple idea that we just remember what we spend the most time on. Instead, it proved that the state of completion is what matters. You can either become a victim of this effect, feeling anxious and overwhelmed by your ever-growing to-do list, or you can weaponize it for your own benefit. If you're struggling with procrastination, the Zygarnik effect is your greatest ally. The hardest part of any task is overcoming the initial activation energy. So, just start. Commit to working on that dreaded report, or cleaning that messy room for only 5 minutes. By simply beginning, you open the loop and activate that cognitive tension. Your brain, hating the unresolved state, will start sending you reminders and nudges, demanding that you return to the task and find closure. Marketers use this constantly with serialized content, online courses that drip-feed modules, and teaser trailers that cut off right at the climax, getting you to start something you'll feel compelled to finish. However, this effect has a dark side. It's why unresolved arguments can keep you up at night, replaying conversations in your head as your brain desperately seeks a winning strategy to achieve closure. It's why an unfinished work project can bleed stress into your personal life, making it impossible to relax. To manage this, try a brain dump before bed. Write down all your unfinished tasks and the very next physical step for each. This simple act can signal to your brain that the task is captured and can be addressed later, helping to close the loop mentally and allowing you to finally relax. 3. The lure of the forbidden. Tell someone, whatever you do, don't think about a white bear and what becomes the only thing they can picture. This simple command reveals a profound and rebellious instinct embedded in the human psyche. Now, take that concept and apply it to actions. Tell someone you can't have that, or you're not allowed to go there, and you don't just issue a rule. You create an irresistible magnetic pull towards the very thing you've forbidden. This is the simple, yet potent, power of reverse psychology. It's a technique that plays on a fundamental human driver called reactance. We are hardwired to resist being controlled. The moment we perceive that our freedom of choice is being threatened or limited, our instinct is to push back, defy the authority, and reassert our autonomy. This isn't a sign of immaturity. It's a deeply ingrained survival instinct. When a parent forbids a teenager from going to a party, that party suddenly becomes the most important social event of the year. The restriction itself manufactures the allure. This is the forbidden fruit effect in action. We assume that things that are off limits must be special or valuable. Otherwise, why would they be restricted? Marketers masterfully exploit this. A product labeled as exclusive or not for everyone doesn't just describe its availability. It challenges our ego. It implies we might not be smart, daring, or worthy enough to have it, which triggers our desire to prove that we are. This is amplified by the scarcity principle, making the forbidden item seem both exclusive and rare. However, there is a clear line between clever persuasion and toxic manipulation. In a healthy context, a coach might tell an athlete, "I doubt you have another lap in you," knowing the challenge will spark their drive to prove the coach wrong. But in a manipulative relationship, the same tactic becomes a tool of control. A toxic partner might say, "Fine, leave if you want. I guess I'm just not worth staying for," knowing this statement will provoke guilt and make the other person stay to prove their loyalty. This isn't about motivation. It's about emotional coercion, preying on the other person's fear of being seen as uncaring. The key to disarming this tactic is to develop self-awareness. When you feel a sudden intense desire to do something you've been told not to, pause. Take a breath and ask yourself, is this my decision, or is this a reaction? Is this desire coming from a genuine place, Or is it simply my rebellious instinct fighting against a perceived restriction? Separating authentic choice from defiant reaction is the first step to reclaiming your mental and emotional control, ensuring that your decisions are truly your own. 4. The first number wins. In any negotiation, the first number spoken is often the most important, even if it's completely arbitrary. This is the anchoring bias at work, a powerful mental shortcut that can dictate the outcome of a decision before you've even had a chance to think rationally. Our brains are desperate for a reference point when making judgments, especially about value. So, they latch onto the very first piece of information they receive, the anchor, and use it as a mental yardstick to evaluate everything that follows. All subsequent information is not judged on its own merit, but in relation to that initial anchor point. Imagine you're buying a used car. If the seller starts by asking for $15,000, your mind is now anchored to that high number. Even if you negotiate down to $12,000, you might feel like you got a great deal. But what if the seller had started at $13,000? You might have settled for $10,000 and felt just as victorious. The car's actual value never changed, but your perception of its value and the fairness of the price was completely manipulated by the initial anchor. Real estate agents use this tactic by showing buyers an overpriced, undesirable house first. Every subsequent house, even if also overpriced, seems like a bargain in comparison. This isn't just about money. First impressions are a potent form of social anchoring. If someone is introduced to you as brilliant, you'll unconsciously start looking for evidence to confirm that assessment, filtering their words and actions through that positive lens. Conversely, if they're described as difficult, you'll interpret their behavior more negatively. This is why it's so hard to shake a first impression. The anchor has been set. The bias even affects legal judgments. Studies have shown that the initial settlement amount a lawyer demands, no matter how high, can influence the final award given by a judge or jury, as their minds remain tethered to that first number. The anchor doesn't have to be rational. Even a completely random number can influence a decision if it's introduced at the right time. To protect yourself from being manipulated by an anchor, you must either set the anchor yourself or consciously and deliberately ignore the one that's been presented. Before entering a negotiation, do your own research. Know what the value should be, independent of what you're told. State your price first. By setting your own anchor, you control the frame of the entire conversation. If you can't go first, take a moment to mentally discard the other person's number. Ask yourself, if I had never heard that figure, what would I believe is fair? This act of mental discipline is your best defense against this pervasive bias. 5. The favor that forges a friend. If you want to win someone over, conventional wisdom says you should do something nice for them. But psychology offers a more counterintuitive and far more effective strategy. Ask them to do a small, manageable favor for you. This is the Ben Franklin effect, a brilliant quirk of human cognition that rewires liking through action, not reception. It suggests that we grow to like people for whom we do favors, more so than people who do favors for us. The phenomenon gets its name from Benjamin Franklin himself, who detailed in his autobiography how he turned a hostile political rival into a lifelong ally. Instead of trying to win the man over with compliments or favors of his own, Franklin took a different approach. Knowing the man owned a rare and valuable book, Franklin sent a polite note asking if he could borrow it for a few days. The man, likely flattered, agreed. When Franklin returned the book, he included a note expressing his immense gratitude. The next time they met, the rival's attitude had completely changed. He was friendly, engaging, and their relationship improved from that day forward. This works because of a powerful psychological process called cognitive dissonance. The rival's brain was faced with a conflict between his belief, "I dislike Franklin," and his action, "I just did something kind for Franklin." This contradiction creates mental discomfort. To resolve this tension, the easiest path isn't to change the memory of the action, but to change the belief. The brain adjusts its attitude to align with the behavior, concluding, I must actually like him more than I thought. Why else would I have helped him? The act of kindness justifies itself by creating the feeling to match it. This is a subtle yet profound tool for building rapport. Asking a new colleague for minor help on a task, or a neighbor to borrow a simple tool, doesn't just get you assistance, it makes them more psychologically invested in your relationship. By allowing them to invest a small amount of effort, their brain works to rationalize that investment by increasing their positive feelings toward you. This is also why doing too many unsolicited favors for someone can sometimes backfire, as it places them in a state of obligation rather than voluntary investment. Salespeople and politicians use this by asking for small initial commitments, like filling out a survey or donating a tiny amount, knowing that this small investment makes future, larger commitments more likely. It's a powerful reminder that connection is often built not on what we receive, but on what we are given the opportunity to give. 6. Drowning in freedom. For generations, we've been told that more choice is the ultimate form of freedom and empowerment. The ability to choose from hundreds of television channels, thousands of potential partners on a dating app, or an endless aisle of cereal brands should, in theory, guarantee our happiness. But modern life reveals a deeply uncomfortable truth. The opposite is often true. This is the paradox of choice, a psychological phenomenon which argues that an abundance of options, rather than liberating us, can lead to decision paralysis, anxiety, and profound regret. When faced with a manageable number of choices, we feel in control. But as the number of options explodes, our cognitive system becomes overwhelmed. The mental effort required to evaluate every possible outcome becomes exhausting, leading to one of three negative results. We either freeze, making no decision at all. We overanalyze for hours, draining our mental energy. Or we make a hasty choice, just to escape the anxiety, only to be plagued by doubt later. With every option comes an opportunity cost. When you finally choose one, your brain is haunted by the ghosts of all the other choices you could have made. Did you pick the best one? This constant second-guessing erodes any satisfaction you might have felt with your choice. Psychologist Barry Schwartz, who popularized this concept, points to a famous experiment that illustrates it perfectly. Researchers set up a jam tasting booth in a grocery store. On one day, they offered 24 different flavors. Hordes of people stopped to look, intrigued by the variety, but almost no one actually bought a jar. On another day, they offered only 6 flavors. Fewer people stopped. But of those who did, sales increased by a staggering 1,000%. The limited selection made the decision feel manageable, clear, and satisfying. We see this everywhere today. Dating apps, with their illusion of unlimited possibilities, can make it harder to commit to one person, trapping users in a cycle of wondering if someone better is just one swipe away. Career paths are no longer linear, and the sheer number of options can leave people feeling lost and uncommitted, fearing they'll choose the wrong path. The secret to navigating this paradox isn't to eliminate choice, but to intelligently constrain it. Before you look for a solution, define your problem. Know what you truly want, set firm criteria, and learn to ignore the rest. By creating your own limited menu, you can reclaim your freedom from the tyranny of too much choice and find joy in the decisions you make. 7. The art of the outrageous ask. If you want someone to agree to a request, one of the most effective strategies is to start by asking for something you know they will refuse. This is the door-in-the-face technique, a fascinating persuasion strategy that works by leveraging our deep-seated need for social compromise and fairness. The process is a simple, two-step dance of negotiation. First, you make a large, almost unreasonable request, one that you fully expect the other person to reject. When they inevitably say no, metaphorically slamming the door in your face, you immediately follow up with a much smaller, more reasonable request, which was, in fact, the one you wanted all along. To the other person, this second request suddenly seems incredibly fair and manageable. This isn't just because it's smaller. It's because the exchange is framed by a powerful psychological principle called reciprocal concessions. When you appear to back down from your initial extreme position, the other person feels a subtle but potent obligation to meet you in the middle. Your concession, even though it was completely manufactured, triggers their desire to be seen as fair and cooperative, making them far more likely to agree to your second request than if you had simply asked for it from the start. Imagine a charity worker asking for a $500 donation. For most people, that's a firm no. But when the worker immediately follows up with, "I understand," would you perhaps consider a donation of just $20 to help out? That $20 now feels like a minor, almost painless gesture. A teenager who wants to borrow the car for the night might first ask to take it for the entire weekend. When their parents refuse, the request for just one night is reframed not as a demand, but as a responsible compromise. In a salary negotiation, an employee seeking a $5,000 raise might start by asking for $10,000. When the employer balks, the $5,000 compromise seems like a perfectly reasonable middle ground. However, there's a crucial caveat. The initial request must be large, but not so absurd that it seems like a joke or an insult. If the other person feels openly manipulated, the entire strategy will backfire and could damage your credibility. The first ask must be within the realm of possibility, even if it's unlikely. To spot this tactic being used on you, always evaluate a request on its own merits. Pause and ask yourself, would I have agreed to this second request if it had been the very first thing they asked me? If the answer is no, you've likely just been guided through a carefully constructed path of persuasion. 8. The power of the first yes. The journey to a major commitment rarely begins with a giant leap. Instead, it often starts with a single, tiny, almost insignificant step. This is the foundation of the foot in the door technique, a powerful and widely used persuasion tactic. It's based on a simple premise. If you can get someone to say yes to a small, low-stakes request, they become far more likely to agree to a larger, more significant one later on. This strategy is the polar opposite of the door-in-the-face technique. Instead of starting big, you start small and build momentum. This works by exploiting our profound psychological need to be consistent with our past actions and decisions. Once we make a choice or take a stand on an issue, even a minor one, we feel a strong internal pressure to stick with it. Saying yes to that first small request subtly changes our self-perception. We begin to see ourselves as the kind of person who engages with this issue or helps this person. A charity might first ask you to sign a simple online petition. It costs you nothing but a moment of your time. But later, when they follow up with a request for a donation, you are psychologically primed to agree. You've already publicly identified as a supporter, and refusing to help now would create cognitive dissonance, a conflict between your past action and your present one. Salespeople use this by asking, "Can I have just a minute of your time?" That first yes is the crack in the door. It makes it much harder to say no to the sales pitch that follows, because you have already committed to the interaction. Subscription services like Netflix or Amazon Prime master this by offering a free trial. Once you've invested time setting up a profile and integrating the service into your routine, the act of canceling feels like a loss, making you more likely to roll over into a paid subscription. Historically, this technique has been used in more chilling contexts. During the Korean War, Chinese captors used this method to subtly manipulate American prisoners of war. Instead of forcing them to accept communist ideology, they started with tiny requests, like asking them to make a small anti-American statement, such as the U.S. isn't perfect. Over time, these small admissions were escalated into writing essays and eventually making public pro-communist statements. The prisoners, seeking to remain consistent with their previous small concessions, slowly shifted their entire belief system, often believing they did so of their own free will. This demonstrates the incredible power of gradual commitment, where each yes builds on the last, making it increasingly difficult to change course. 9. The choice that isn't a choice. Sometimes, the easiest way to sell something is to offer a slightly worse version of it right next to it. This is the decoy effect, a masterful pricing and marketing strategy that guides your choice by presenting an option that was never actually meant to be chosen. It works by exploiting a fundamental flaw in our decision-making. Our brains are terrible at judging the absolute value of something, but they are excellent at making relative comparisons. The decoy provides a simple, flawed reference point that makes the real target option seem like the clear, logical winner. Here's a classic example. Imagine you're at a movie theater and see two options for popcorn, a small for $3 and a large for $7. You might hesitate. The $4 jump is significant, and you're not sure if you need that much. Now the theater introduces a third option, a decoy. It's a medium popcorn for $6.50. Suddenly, your decision becomes effortless. No one in their right mind would buy the medium. For just 50 cents more, you can get the large. The large popcorn is now reframed as an incredible bargain. The medium's only job was to make the large look better by comparison. You walk away feeling like a smart consumer, but in reality, your choice was carefully engineered from the start to make you spend more money. This principle is known in cognitive science as asymmetric domination. The decoy option is asymmetrically dominated by the target option, the large popcorn, meaning it's clearly inferior in one key aspect, price per ounce, while being only slightly better in another, total price. This makes the target option look vastly superior, creating an illusion of a smart decision. This trick is used everywhere. A tech company might offer 3 versions of a product: a basic model, a premium model, and a decoy model that costs almost as much as the premium, but lacks key features. The decoy makes the premium phone seem like the obvious choice. Restaurant wine lists often include a ridiculously overpriced bottle not to sell it, but to make the second most expensive bottle, the one they actually want you to buy, look reasonably priced. Even political candidates can be decoys. In a 3-person race, a candidate who is similar but clearly inferior to another can inadvertently boost the appeal of their stronger rival by making them look better in comparison. To defeat this, you must learn to evaluate each option independently. Before comparing, ask yourself a simple question. Ignoring the other choices, is this specific option worth the price for me? This breaks the spell of relative comparison and puts you back in control. 10. The hunger for the hard to get. Why do we instinctively crave what we can't have? Why does a limited edition sneaker, a secret menu item, or an exclusive opportunity suddenly become irresistible? The answer lies in the scarcity principle, one of the most potent and reliable triggers of human desire. This powerful psychological effect dictates that when an opportunity, product, or even a person is perceived as being in limited supply, our brain instantly assigns it a higher value and a greater sense of urgency. This is not a modern marketing invention. It is a deep-seated survival instinct forged over millennia of evolution. For our ancestors, scarce resources like food, clean water, or safe shelter were a matter of life and death. We evolved to prioritize and compete for things that were rare because our very survival depended on it. Our brains are still running on this ancient software. Even though we now live in a world of abundance, we react to perceived scarcity as if it's a critical threat to our well-being. When something is scarce, it also implicitly signals social proof. If it's about to run out, it must be because many other people want it, and therefore it must be good. Today, marketers have turned this survival instinct into a powerful sales tool. Phrases like limited time offer, only 2 left in stock, and sale ends today are not just informational messages. They are psychological triggers designed to bypass our rational thought and create an immediate sense of urgency. This activates our powerful fear of missing out, FOMO, which is closely tied to the pain of loss aversion. The thought of losing an opportunity is often psychologically twice as painful as the pleasure of gaining it is good, so we act impulsively to avoid that potential regret. Luxury brands are the undisputed masters of artificial scarcity. They don't produce limited quantities of high-end watches or handbags because they can make more. They do it because they know that scarcity itself is a key ingredient of desire. When Apple releases a new iPhone and supply is intentionally kept just below demand, the anticipation and frenzy skyrocket. This has now evolved into the digital world. Think of an online course where enrollment closes Friday, a webinar with only 100 spots available, or a hyped-up NFT drop. The digital scarcity is just as powerful as physical scarcity. The principle also applies profoundly to relationships and social dynamics. A person who is always available may be taken for granted, but someone who is selective with their time and attention often appears more valuable and intriguing. Playing hard to get works because it manufactures scarcity, forcing the other person to invest more effort and thereby value the potential connection more highly. The rule is brutally simple. What is abundant is often overlooked, but what is scarce is instinctively coveted. Recognizing this allows you to step back from the manufactured urgency and ask yourself the crucial question: do I truly want this for its intrinsic value, or am I just reacting to the fear that I might not be able to have it? 11. The crowd of cowards. Imagine you're walking through a busy city square when a man ahead of you suddenly clutches his chest and collapses. In the seconds that follow, a strange and unsettling paralysis seems to grip the crowd. Dozens of people stop and stare. Some pull out their phones. Others simply alter their path to walk around him. No one rushes to help. You feel a surge of panic, a voice in your head screaming, "Do something." But you hesitate, your feet feeling as though they're encased in concrete. Why? If you were the only person there, you would almost certainly act. But surrounded by others, you become a victim of the bystander effect. This chilling psychological phenomenon dictates that the more people who witness an emergency, the less likely any single individual is to intervene. It's a paradox that defies our belief in collective safety. The effect was famously brought into the public consciousness by the tragic 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese in New York City. Genovese was attacked multiple times over a half-hour period, and despite reports that dozens of residents heard her screams or saw parts of the attack, no one intervened in time. The public outcry was immense, but psychologists sought to understand the mechanism of this inaction. It wasn't that the witnesses were cruel or apathetic. They were trapped in a psychological cage built from two primary bars. The first is diffusion of responsibility. When you are the sole witness, 100% of the responsibility to act rests on your shoulders. But with every additional person present, that responsibility is divided. With 10 witnesses, you feel only 10% responsible. Your brain makes a dangerous calculation. Surely someone else is more qualified. Someone else has already called for help. Someone else will step in. When everyone thinks this, no one does anything. The second mechanism is pluralistic ignorance. Humans are social creatures who constantly look to others for cues on how to behave, especially in ambiguous situations. In an emergency, we scan the faces of those around us. If no one else is reacting with alarm, we subconsciously conclude that perhaps it isn't a real emergency. If it were serious, people would be panicking. Since they're calm, I must be overreacting. This creates a feedback loop of collective inaction, where everyone is waiting for someone else to make the first move. This isn't just about street emergencies. It's prevalent in digital spaces with cyberbullying and in workplaces where harassment goes unreported. To break the spell, you must shatter the diffusion of responsibility. If you are the one in need, don't just shout for someone to help. Point to a single person, look them in the eye, and say, "You in the blue coat, call 911. By assigning a direct, personal command, you make it impossible for them to hide in the crowd. And if you are in the crowd, you must be the one to break the pluralistic ignorance. Decide to be the person who acts first, because in a crowd of cowards, one person's courage is all it takes to save a life. 12. The echo chamber of the crowd. Have you ever found yourself choosing a busy, bustling restaurant over the empty one right next door? assuming the crowd must know something you don't? Or have you watched a video online simply because it had millions of views, figuring it had to be good? This powerful, often unconscious, pull to follow the actions and beliefs of others is known as social proof. It's the psychological phenomenon where we assume that the behavior of a large group of people is the correct behavior, especially when we are in a state of uncertainty. We look to the crowd for guidance, outsourcing our critical thinking to the perceived wisdom of the majority. This instinct is not a modern flaw. It's a deeply embedded survival mechanism. For our ancient ancestors, conforming to the tribe was a matter of life and death. If everyone in your group suddenly started running, it was far safer to run with them than to stop and investigate the cause. Sticking with the group meant access to resources, protection from predators, and social cohesion. Being ostracized was a death sentence. Our brains are therefore hardwired with a simple, powerful heuristic. When in doubt, do what everyone else is doing. Marketers and businesses have mastered the art of weaponizing this ancient instinct. When a website displays a banner that says, "Over 1 million satisfied customers," it isn't just stating a fact, it's providing social proof to eliminate your purchasing anxiety. Customer reviews, celebrity endorsements, testimonials, and influencer marketing are all designed to tap into this principle. If all these people liked it, your brain reasons, then I probably will too. In the digital age, this has been amplified 1,000-fold. Likes, shares, subscriber counts, and follower numbers have become the new currency of social validation. We judge the value of an idea, a product, or a person based on these often superficial metrics. However, social proof has a perilous dark side. It can lead to a dangerous phenomenon called herd mentality, where individuals collectively engage in irrational or harmful behavior. This fuels financial bubbles, like the rush to buy meme stocks or cryptocurrencies, where people invest not because they understand the asset, but because they fear being left out of the crowd's gains. It also drives political polarization, as people retreat into echo chambers, accepting information as true simply because everyone in their social circle agrees with it. Fake reviews, bot-generated comments, and staged popularity can easily manufacture the illusion of a consensus, tricking you into following a crowd that doesn't even exist. To protect yourself, you must cultivate the habit of independent thought. When you feel yourself being pulled by the tide of the majority, ask, am I doing this because I've evaluated it and believe it's the right choice, or am I just following the herd? 13. The slow burn of familiarity. Think of a song you heard on the radio for the first time and immediately disliked. The melody was annoying, the lyrics were cliché. But after hearing it a dozen more times, in the grocery store, at the gym, in a friend's car, something strange begins to happen. You find yourself humming the tune. You might even start to like. This gradual, often unconscious, shift from indifference or even dislike to preference is a perfect example of the mere exposure effect. This psychological phenomenon dictates that repeated exposure to a stimulus is, by itself, enough to increase our liking for it. The more we see or hear something, the more comfortable and positive we feel towards it. This effect was first systematically studied by psychologist Robert Zayonk in the 1960s. In a series of brilliant experiments, he exposed participants to unfamiliar stimuli like nonsense words, geometric shapes, or foreign characters. Some participants saw a specific character only once, while others saw it up to 25 times. Later, when asked which characters they found most pleasing, they consistently chose the ones they had been exposed to most frequently, even though they had no conscious memory of seeing them before. Zajonk's conclusion was groundbreaking. Familiarity doesn't just breed contempt, it breeds comfort. The psychological root of this bias lies in our evolutionary wiring for survival. Our brains are hardwired to be cautious of the novel and the unfamiliar. A new plant could be poisonous. A strange animal could be a predator. In contrast, something we have encountered repeatedly without negative consequences, is implicitly labeled as safe. This feeling of safety and the ease of cognitive processing that comes with familiarity get misinterpreted by our brain as a positive feeling or liking. This principle is a cornerstone of modern advertising companies. Don't always need to convince you that their product is superior with facts and figures. Sometimes, they just need to ensure their brand name, logo, and jingle are everywhere. The constant repetition makes the brand feel familiar, and that familiarity translates into trust when you're standing in a store aisle making a choice. The same is true in politics. A candidate whose name and face are plastered on billboards and TV ads becomes more likable and electable simply because they are familiar. It even shapes our relationships. We often develop friendships with coworkers or classmates, not because of an initial spark, but because the slow burn of daily exposure makes them feel safe and trustworthy. However, there's a limit. Overexposure can lead to boredom and annoyance. The reason a song played on repeat eventually becomes irritating. But within that limit, the mere exposure effect is a subtle yet powerful force that shapes our tastes, our relationships, and our choices, often without our conscious consent. 14. The discomfort of contradiction. People like to believe they are rational, consistent beings who act in alignment with their values. But what happens when our actions directly contradict our beliefs? What happens when a person who prides themselves on being healthy secretly smokes a cigarette, or when someone who believes in honesty tells a significant lie? The result is a powerful and deeply uncomfortable state of mental tension known as cognitive dissonance. This is the psychological discomfort we experience when we hold two or more contradictory beliefs, or when our behavior clashes with our self-image. To escape this discomfort, our brain will go to extraordinary lengths to resolve the conflict, often not by changing our behavior, but by changing our beliefs. Imagine a person who spends a fortune on a luxury car, only to discover it's unreliable and expensive to maintain. This creates a painful dissonance between their belief, "I am a smart, savvy consumer," and the reality, "I made a foolish purchase." To resolve this, they won't typically admit their mistake. Instead, their mind will perform a series of mental gymnastics. They might start to overemphasize the car's positive qualities. Sure, it's in the shop a lot, but the driving experience is unparalleled. They might downplay the negatives. All high-performance cars are sensitive. Or they might change their criteria for what makes a good car. It's not about reliability. It's about the statement it makes. They are unconsciously rewriting their own beliefs to justify their behavior and restore mental harmony. This effect is a constant, powerful force in our daily lives. A person who stays in a toxic relationship might justify it by saying, "It's complicated, but we have a deep connection," rather than facing the painful reality that they should leave. Smokers who know the health risks might rationalize their habit by saying, "Well, we all have to die of something, or it helps me manage stress." The brain's primary goal is not to be correct. Its primary goal is to be consistent. Cult leaders, politicians, and manipulators are masters at exploiting cognitive dissonance. They often persuade followers to take a small, seemingly insignificant action that aligns with their cause. Once that action is taken, the person's self-image begins to shift. To remain consistent with that first step, they become more likely to agree to larger and larger commitments, adjusting their beliefs along the way to justify their escalating involvement. The key to overcoming cognitive dissonance is self-awareness. When you feel defensive, uncomfortable, or find yourself making elaborate justifications for a decision, pause. Ask yourself, am I defending this choice because I truly believe it's right, or because admitting I was wrong is too uncomfortable? The ability to face that discomfort is the foundation of genuine intellectual honesty and personal growth. 15. The prophecy of potential. What if the simple act of believing in someone's potential could actually create it? What if your expectations of others could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, shaping their reality in a tangible and measurable way? This is the core of the Pygmalion effect, a remarkable psychological phenomenon where high expectations placed upon people lead to an increase in their performance. Named after the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he carved which was then brought to life. This effect demonstrates that our beliefs about others are not passive observations. They are active forces that can sculpt the future. The most famous and compelling demonstration of this effect was the landmark 1968 Oak School experiment conducted by psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. At the beginning of the school year, they administered a standard IQ test to elementary school students. Afterward, they told the teachers that the test had identified certain students as academic bloomers who were poised for exceptional intellectual growth in the coming year. In reality, these bloomers were chosen completely at random. The only difference between them and their peers was the label that had been planted in the minds of their teachers. When the researchers returned at the end of the year and retested the students, the results were astonishing. The randomly chosen bloomers had significantly higher gains in their IQ scores compared to the other students. The teachers' expectations had become reality. Rosenthal concluded that this happened through subtle, often unconscious, changes in the teacher's behavior. They gave the gifted students more warmth and encouragement, challenged them with more difficult material, gave them more opportunities to respond in class, and provided them with more detailed, constructive feedback. The teacher's belief in their potential created a richer, more supportive learning environment that enabled those students to flourish. This effect extends far beyond the classroom. In the workplace, managers who have high expectations for their employees and communicate that belief create teams that are more motivated, innovative, and productive. These leaders are often called Pygmalion leaders. They don't just manage, they empower, signaling their faith in their team's abilities, which in turn inspires the team to rise to the occasion. The same is true in parenting, coaching, and even in our own personal lives. If you consistently tell a child they are capable and intelligent, they are more likely to internalize that belief and act accordingly. The Pygmalion effect is a powerful testament to the fact that we are all, in some way, sculptors of each other's realities. The expectations we hold can either become a cage that limits potential or a key that unlocks it. 16. The curse of low expectations. Just as the belief in someone's potential can help them achieve greatness, the expectation of failure can become a self-fulfilling curse. This is the golem effect, the dark and destructive counterpart to the Pygmalion effect. It is the psychological principle where low expectations placed upon individuals lead to a decrease in their performance, creating a vicious cycle of failure. The name comes from the mythical golem of Jewish folklore, a creature made from clay that was powerful but mindless, often associated with brute force and a lack of potential. In psychology, the golem effect describes how negative labels and low expectations can drain a person of their confidence and motivation, effectively shaping them into the failure others expect them to be. The mechanisms of the golem effect are a dark mirror of the Pygmalion effect. When a person in a position of authority, be it a teacher, a manager, or a parent, holds low expectations for someone, their behavior subtly changes. They may offer less encouragement, provide fewer opportunities for growth, assign less challenging tasks, and give less constructive feedback. They might communicate their doubt through nonverbal cues like a lack of eye contact, a dismissive tone, or a general sense of disinterest. The individual on the receiving end of these signals begins to internalize the negative perception. Their self-esteem erodes. They start to doubt their own abilities, and their motivation plummets. Why try hard if you're already seen as incapable? As their effort decreases, their performance inevitably suffers, which in turn confirms the initial low expectation of the authority figure. This destructive cycle has been demonstrated in numerous settings. In schools, students who are unfairly labeled as slow learners or troublemakers often disengage from learning, not because they are inherently less capable, but because the system has already signaled to them that they are expected to fail. In the workplace, an employee who senses that their boss doubts their abilities is more likely to underperform, avoid taking on new challenges, and hesitate in their decision-making. The manager's skepticism becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of incompetence. What makes the golem effect particularly insidious is that it often operates unconsciously. A manager might not be actively trying to sabotage an employee, but their implicit biases and low expectations can be just as damaging as outright criticism. It's the absence of encouragement, the lack of trust, the unspoken assumption of failure that does the real harm. Breaking free from this curse requires a conscious intervention. If you are a leader, you must be hyper-aware of the expectations you set, actively looking for potential in everyone. And if you feel you are the victim of the golem effect, you must learn to mentally reject the limitations others place upon you, seeking out mentors and environments that reflect a belief in your true potential. 17. The phantom audience. You're about to give a presentation when you notice a small coffee stain on your shirt. Instantly, your heart sinks. You walk into the room convinced that every single eye is locked onto that tiny imperfection, that a silent chorus of judgment is echoing in the minds of the audience. You feel a wave of embarrassment, certain that this minor flaw has completely undermined your credibility. But in reality, almost no one noticed. And the one or two who did forgot about it seconds later. This powerful, yet completely unfounded, feeling of being the center of social attention is known as the spotlight effect. It is the cognitive bias that causes us to vastly overestimate how much other people notice our appearance, our actions, and especially our mistakes. This bias was famously demonstrated in an experiment by psychologists Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky. They had participants wear what they considered an embarrassing t-shirt, featuring a large picture of the singer Barry Manilow, and then briefly enter a room of other students. Afterward, they were asked to estimate how many people in the room had noticed their shirt. The participants believed that at least half the room had seen and judged their cringe-worthy attire. The reality. Only about 25% of the people had even noticed. We systematically believe that the social spotlight is shining on us far more brightly than it actually is. The root of this effect lies in a simple cognitive error: egocentrism. We are the center of our own universe. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are intensely vivid to us, so we naturally assume they are just as salient to others. We forget that everyone else is also the center of their own universe, caught up in their own thoughts, worries, and insecurities. They are too busy thinking about the stain on their shirt, the awkward thing they just said, or the presentation they have to give next to pay much attention to our minor blunders. The spotlight effect is the primary fuel for social anxiety. It's the voice in your head that stops you from speaking up in a meeting, asking someone to dance, or trying something new, all because of the fear of being judged. It also causes us to dwell on past embarrassments, replaying moments from years ago with the false belief that others remember them as clearly as we do. Understanding this bias can be incredibly liberating. The next time you feel self-conscious, remind yourself of the truth. Most people are not paying attention to you. The phantom audience you fear is just that, a phantom. Realizing this frees you to take more risks, express yourself more authentically, and stop overanalyzing small mistakes. The spotlight you feel isn't real. You can simply choose to walk out of it. 18. The beauty of the blush. We live in a culture that often idolizes perfection. We're told to project an image of unwavering competence, flawless confidence, and complete control. But psychology reveals a counterintuitive truth. Perfection is not only unattainable, it's often unrelatable and even intimidating. In fact, making a small, harmless mistake can actually make people like you more. This is the pratfall effect, a fascinating psychological phenomenon where a person who is perceived as highly competent becomes more endearing and likable after they commit a small blunder. This effect was first studied by social psychologist Elliot Aronson in a now famous experiment. He had participants listen to recordings of people answering a series of difficult trivia questions. One recording featured a near-perfect contestant who answered 92% of the questions correctly. Another featured an average contestant who did moderately well. In one version of the experiment, after the recording ended, participants heard the near-perfect contestant commit a small blunder. The sound of them spilling a cup of coffee all over themselves, followed by an embarrassed, "Oh my goodness." The results were telling. When the competent person made the mistake, the participants' liking for them increased significantly. However, when the average person spilled the coffee, their likability went down. The conclusion was clear. A small flaw humanizes a person who is otherwise seen as superior, but it only reinforces the mediocrity of someone who is already perceived as average. The pratfall makes the high achiever seem less like a god and more like one of us. It shatters the intimidating aura of perfection and makes them more approachable and relatable. This is why we are often drawn to celebrities who are self-deprecating or leaders who can laugh at their own small mistakes. A politician who stumbles over a word and jokes about it is often seen as more charming than one who delivers a cold, flawless speech. A job candidate who confidently admits to a minor weakness can seem more genuine and trustworthy than one who pretends to have none. The pratfall effect shows that vulnerability is not a weakness, it is a bridge to connection. It reassures others that despite your competence, you are still human. It gives them permission to be imperfect as well. So, don't be afraid of the occasional harmless mistake. Don't beat yourself up over a small, awkward moment. That little blunder doesn't ruin your image. It might just be the very thing that makes people feel closer to you. 19. The modern anxiety of elsewhere. There's a party happening across town, and you weren't invited. Your friends are posting pictures from an amazing vacation while you're stuck at home. A new trend is exploding on social media, and you feel like you're the last person to know about it. That creeping, restless, and deeply unsettling anxiety you feel has a modern name. FOMO, or the fear of missing out. It is a powerful psychological effect where the belief that others are having more rewarding experiences than you are creates a sense of social anxiety and a compulsive urge to stay constantly connected. It's the nagging feeling that no matter what you are doing, you should be doing something else, something better, somewhere else. While the term is new, the fear itself is ancient. FOMO is a modern manifestation of our primal need for social belonging. For our ancestors, being excluded from the group, missing out on a hunt, a shared resource, or a crucial piece of information could mean the difference between survival and death. Today, the stakes are lower, but our brains are still wired to react to social exclusion as a critical threat. The thought of others gaining experiences, status, or advantages without us activates this deep-seated anxiety. Social media has poured gasoline on this ancient fire. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok are not windows into reality. They are carefully curated highlight reels of other people's lives. They present a constant, distorted stream of vacations, parties, successes, and perfect moments. Even though we logically know that people only post their best moments, our emotional brain doesn't make that distinction. It creates the powerful illusion that everyone else is living a richer, more exciting, and more fulfilling life than we are. This constant comparison is a recipe for dissatisfaction. Marketers have become experts at exploiting FOMO. Sales tactics like limited time offer, only 2 left in stock, and join 1,008 others who have already signed up, are designed to trigger a sense of scarcity and urgency. They create the fear that if you don't act now, you will be left behind, missing out on an opportunity that everyone else is enjoying. This can lead to impulsive buying, overcommitment, and a state of constant distraction. People in the grip of FOMO are never fully present in their own lives because their minds are perpetually worried about the experiences they aren't having. The antidote to FOMO is a conscious shift in mindset, sometimes called JOMO, the joy of missing out. It's the practice of finding contentment in your own choices and embracing the peace that comes from disconnecting. It means reminding yourself that missing out is an inevitable part of life. Instead of chasing every experience, you focus on the ones that genuinely matter to you, confident in the knowledge that a life well lived is not about being everywhere, but about being fully present where you are. 20. The futility of the finish line. You finally get that promotion you've been working towards for years. You buy the new car you've been dreaming of. You go on that perfect vacation. In the moment, you feel a surge of pure, ecstatic joy. You think to yourself, this is it. I've made it. I will be happy now. But after a few weeks, or maybe a few months, the excitement inevitably fades. The promotion becomes just a job. The new car becomes just a way to get to work, and the vacation becomes a pleasant memory. You find yourself right back where you started, with the same baseline level of happiness, already looking for the next thing to chase. This endless, futile pursuit of lasting happiness through external achievements is known as the hedonic treadmill. The concept, also called hedonic adaptation, suggests that humans have a relatively stable, set point of happiness. Major life events, both positive and negative, can temporarily knock us off this baseline, but we almost always return to it over time. It's called a treadmill because, like running on one, no matter how much effort you put in, you ultimately stay in the same place. Our brains are incredibly efficient at adapting to new circumstances. When something new and exciting happens, it provides a temporary boost of dopamine, but our system quickly adjusts. The new reality becomes the new normal, and the thrill is gone. This effect has been proven in numerous studies, most famously by researchers who studied lottery winners and accident victims. They found that, after an initial spike in happiness, lottery winners were, on average, no happier a year later than they were before their windfall. Conversely, people who suffered life-altering accidents and became paralyzed experienced a devastating drop in happiness initially. But within a year, most had adapted to their new circumstances and reported levels of happiness surprisingly close to their pre-accident baseline. This demonstrates the incredible resilience of the human spirit, but also the fleeting nature of externally derived joy. Consumer culture is built entirely on the hedonic treadmill. Marketers sell the promise that the next purchase, the newer phone, the bigger house, the fancier watch, will be the one that finally delivers lasting contentment. But because our happiness always resets, we are trapped in a constant cycle of wanting more. The finish line for happiness is always moving. So how do you get off the treadmill? The key is to shift your focus from accumulation to appreciation. Studies show that practices like gratitude, mindfulness, and savoring the present moment can actively slow down the process of adaptation. Instead of chasing major milestones, find joy in small, recurring pleasures. Happiness is not a destination you arrive at. It's a state of mind you cultivate. By appreciating what you have right now, rather than waiting for some future achievement to complete you, you can step off the treadmill and into a more stable and meaningful sense of well-being. 21. The architecture of reality. Is a glass half empty or half full? The question is a classic cliché, but it illustrates one of the most powerful and pervasive cognitive biases that shapes our reality: the framing effect. This principle dictates that the way information is presented, or framed, can completely alter how we perceive it and the decisions we make based on it, even when the underlying facts remain identical. It proves that humans are not purely rational creatures. We are deeply influenced by the emotional packaging of information. It's not just what you say, but how you say it, that truly matters. Imagine you are a patient about to undergo a serious medical procedure. The surgeon could present the risk in two ways. Frame A: this procedure has a 90% survival rate. Frame B: this procedure has a 10% mortality rate. The statistical reality is exactly the same, but the emotional impact is worlds apart. The first frame, focusing on the positive outcome, survival, feels reassuring and inspires confidence. The second frame, focusing on the negative outcome, mortality, sounds terrifying and might cause you to refuse the surgery. Most people are far more likely to agree to the procedure when presented with the 90% survival frame, demonstrating how easily our choices can be manipulated by simple changes in language. This effect is a fundamental tool in marketing, media, and politics. A ground beef product labeled 80% lean sounds healthy and appealing. The exact same product labeled 20% fat sounds greasy and unhealthy. A store advertising a 20% discount feels like you are gaining value, while framing it as paying 80% of the price feels like a standard transaction. The numbers are the same, but the frame changes your perception of the deal. News outlets wield this power daily. A headline that reads, "Unemployment rate drops to lowest level in 50 years" frames the economy as strong and successful. Another headline, using the same data, could read, "Millions still unemployed despite economic gains," framing the situation as a persistent crisis. Neither headline is lying, but each one is constructing a different emotional reality for the reader. Politicians are masters of this art, branding tax cuts for corporations as job creation acts or increased government surveillance as public safety measures. The words chosen are designed to prime a specific emotional response before any logical analysis can even begin. Recognizing the framing effect is a critical skill for clear thinking. The next time you are presented with a choice, a statistic, or a news story, make a conscious effort to reframe it. Look at it from the opposite perspective. If a product is 95% fat-free, acknowledge that it is 5% fat. If a policy has a high success rate, consider the failure rate. By mentally flipping the frame, you can strip away the emotional manipulation and evaluate the facts on their own merit, allowing you to see the true architecture of the reality being presented to you. 22. The glitch in the matrix. Have you ever learned a new, obscure word and then suddenly started hearing it everywhere? Or perhaps you decided to buy a specific model of car, and now you see that exact car on every street corner. It can feel like a strange coincidence, a glitch in the matrix, or even a sign from the universe. But this experience is so common that it has a name: the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, or more formally, the frequency illusion. This cognitive bias is a two-part mental trick your brain plays on you. It's the illusion that something has suddenly become more common, when in reality, your brain has just developed a new filter for noticing it. The first part of the illusion is selective attention. Your brain is constantly bombarded with an overwhelming amount of sensory information: sights, sounds, and conversations. To prevent being overloaded, it has to filter out almost everything, paying attention only to what it deems important or relevant at that moment. When you learn a new word, buy a new product, or become interested in a new concept, you are essentially giving your brain a new item for its relevant list. Your brain's reticular activating system, which acts as this filter, then begins to subconsciously scan your environment for it. The word, the car, the concept, they were always there. You just never noticed them before because your brain had previously classified them as irrelevant noise. The second part is confirmation bias. Once your selective attention starts pointing out the new thing everywhere, your confirmation bias kicks in to reinforce the illusion. Each time you see the car or hear the word, your brain doesn't think, "My filter is working well." Instead, it concludes, "Wow, this really is everywhere all of a sudden." This second step confirms the feeling of a meaningful coincidence, making the illusion feel real and significant. Marketers often exploit this effect. Once you click on an ad for a product, you suddenly start seeing that product everywhere, on social media, on websites, in your email. This isn't a coincidence. It's a targeted ad campaign. But the frequency illusion makes it feel like the product is gaining immense popularity, which can make you more likely to buy it. It also plays a significant role in reinforcing personal beliefs. If you start to believe in a particular conspiracy theory, You will suddenly see evidence for it everywhere, not because there is more evidence, but because your brain is now actively filtering the world to find it. Understanding this phenomenon is a powerful reminder that our perception of reality is not a perfect recording of the world. It is a heavily edited version, curated by our own attention and biases. 23. The golden glow of a single trait. Imagine a new colleague walks into the office on their first day. They are impeccably dressed, have a warm, charismatic smile, and speak with articulate confidence. Before they've even completed a single work-related task, your brain has already started filling in the blanks. You instinctively assume they must also be intelligent, competent, hardworking, and kind. This powerful, often misleading, cognitive shortcut is the halo effect. It is a psychological bias where our overall impression of a person is unduly influenced by a single positive trait, causing us to see them in a golden, idealized glow. The halo effect works because our brains crave coherence and simplicity. It's mentally taxing to hold a complex, nuanced view of someone, so we prefer to create a simple, consistent narrative. If we observe one highly positive quality, like physical attractiveness or eloquence, our brain tends to generalize that positivity to all of their other, unknown qualities. This creates a halo of perceived virtue around them. The effect was first identified by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920, who noticed that military officers' ratings of their soldiers' different qualities, like leadership, intelligence, and character, were surprisingly uniform. If an officer had a high opinion of a soldier in one area, they tended to rate them highly in all others, suggesting their judgment was clouded by an overall positive impression. This bias has profound and often unfair consequences. Studies have consistently shown that people perceived as physically attractive are more likely to be hired, receive higher salaries, and even be given lighter sentences in court. We unconsciously associate attractiveness with other positive attributes like intelligence and trustworthiness, even when there is no evidence to support it. A confident speaker in a meeting is often seen as more competent than a quiet but brilliant colleague. A celebrity who champions a popular charity is often perceived as a morally good person, regardless of their private actions. Marketers use the halo effect to build brand loyalty. If a company like Apple releases one highly successful and well-designed product, like the iPhone, consumers tend to assume that all of their other products, laptops, watches, etc., must be of equally high quality. This brand halo can be a powerful driver of sales. The danger of the halo effect is that it can blind us to red flags and lead to poor judgment. We may place our trust in an incompetent but charismatic leader, or hire a charming but unproductive employee. To counteract it, we must make a conscious effort to evaluate individuals based on specific evidence-based qualities rather than a vague overall feeling. We must ask ourselves, am I judging their competence based on their actual work, or am I being swayed by their confidence and charm? 24. The devil's horns of a single flaw. Just as a single positive trait can create a golden halo of perceived virtue, a single negative trait can cast a dark shadow over every other aspect of a person's character. This is the horn effect, the sinister and equally powerful counterpart to the halo effect. It is a cognitive bias where one negative quality, such as a poor first impression, an unconventional appearance, or single mistake, causes us to assume that everything else about that person is also negative. Instead of a halo, we place a pair of devil's horns on them, filtering all of their subsequent actions through a lens of suspicion and negative judgment. The horn effect operates on the same principle of cognitive efficiency as the halo effect. Our brains prefer simple, consistent narratives. If our first interaction with someone is negative, perhaps they were rude, late, or dressed sloppily, our brain finds it easier to build a consistently negative story about them rather than hold a complex view. We assume the rude person must also be incompetent, the late person must be lazy, and the sloppily dressed person must be careless in all areas of their life. This initial negative anchor becomes the foundation upon which we build our entire perception of them. This bias plays out in countless and often devastating ways. In a job interview, a candidate who speaks with a slight hesitation or appears nervous might be perceived as less competent, even if their skills and experience are superior. A student who is disruptive in class might be unfairly labeled by a teacher as unintelligent, even if their academic performance is strong. A single, well-publicized scandal can tarnish a public figure's entire career, causing decades of good work to be overlooked and reinterpreted in the most negative light possible. The horn effect also creates self-fulfilling prophecies. When someone is perceived negatively, others tend to treat them with skepticism, distrust, or hostility. This can cause the individual to become defensive, withdrawn, or to underperform, which in turn reinforces the initial negative perception. An employee who is unfairly labeled as not a team player might be excluded from group projects, causing them to become isolated and resentful, thus proving the label right. Like its counterpart, the horn effect is a dangerous shortcut that leads to prejudice and poor judgment. It causes us to write people off based on limited, often superficial, information. To counteract it, we must actively challenge our first impressions. When we find ourselves forming a strong negative opinion of someone based on a single flaw, we must consciously pause and seek out contradictory evidence. We must ask, am I judging this person's entire character based on one mistake? What other information am I missing? By separating the person from the single flaw, we can make fairer, more rational, and more compassionate judgments. 25. The sting of a loss, which would have a greater emotional impact on you. Finding a $100 bill on the street, or realizing you've lost a $100 bill from your wallet. For most people, the answer is overwhelmingly the latter. The sting of the loss feels far more intense than the pleasure of the equivalent gain. This powerful asymmetry in our emotional response is known as loss aversion, a cornerstone principle of behavioral economics. It is the psychological phenomenon that dictates that people are far more motivated to avoid a loss than they are to acquire a gain of the same value. First studied in depth by Nobel Prize-winning psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Their research revealed a surprisingly consistent rule of thumb. Psychologically, the pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of winning. This isn't a sign of pessimism. It's a deeply ingrained evolutionary trait. For our ancestors living on the brink of survival, losing a day's worth of food was a far more significant event, potentially life-threatening, than finding an extra day's worth of food. Our brains therefore evolved to have a hypersensitive alarm system for potential losses, making us fundamentally risk-averse when something we already possess is on the line. This bias is a major driver of irrational decision-making, particularly in finance. It's why investors will often hold on to a losing stock for far too long, hoping it will recover, rather than selling it and accepting the loss. The act of selling makes the loss real, and the anticipated pain is so great that they would rather gamble on an unlikely recovery. This is also the engine behind the sunk cost fallacy, where we continue to invest time, money, or effort into a failing project, a bad relationship, or a boring book simply because we've already invested so much. The thought of losing our initial investment overrides the logical decision to cut our losses and move on. Marketers masterfully exploit loss aversion to create a sense of urgency. Free trials are a prime example. Once you've used a service for 30 days, it starts to feel like yours. The thought of losing access at the end of the trial is a powerful motivator to subscribe. Limited time offers and countdown timers also trigger this fear. The message isn't gain this great deal, but avoid losing this opportunity forever. Employees might stay in unfulfilling jobs for years because the fear of losing a steady paycheck and a sense of security feels more potent than the potential gain of finding a more rewarding career. To overcome loss aversion, you must learn to reframe your decisions. Instead of focusing on what you might lose, force yourself to consider what you might gain by letting go. Realizing that the pain of loss is often psychologically exaggerated can help you make smarter, more rational choices, free from the powerful grip of fear. 26. The invisible price tag of ownership. Have you ever tried to sell something you own? A used car, a piece of furniture, or even a simple concert ticket, only to feel that potential buyers are consistently undervaluing it. You see it as a cherished item with history and value, while they see it as just another second-hand object. This powerful cognitive bias, where we place a higher value on things simply because we own them, is known as the endowment effect. The mere act of ownership attaches an invisible price tag of emotional significance to our possessions, making us believe they are worth more than they objectively are. This effect was first demonstrated in a clever experiment by behavioral economist Richard Thaler. He gave half the participants in a room a coffee mug, and then opened up a market where they could sell their mug to the other half of the participants who had not received one. Logically, the price should have settled somewhere in the middle. Instead, the owners of the mugs demanded, on average, more than twice as much to part with their mug as the buyers were willing to pay to acquire the exact same item. Ownership had, in a matter of minutes, created an artificial sense of value. The endowment effect works for a few key psychological reasons. Firstly, it's tied to loss aversion. Once something becomes ours, selling it or giving it away is framed in our brain as a loss, and as we know, losses are felt more intensely than gains. The pain of parting with our mug feels greater than the pleasure of acquiring the money for it. Secondly, ownership creates an emotional attachment. We begin to associate the object with our identity and our experiences. That old, beat-up car isn't just a vehicle. It's the car you took on your first road trip. This personal history adds a layer of subjective value that the market simply doesn't recognize. This bias explains why many people struggle to declutter their homes. Those old clothes, books, and gadgets that sit unused in a closet are imbued with the value of ownership. And parting with them feels like a tangible loss, even if they serve no practical purpose. It also creates friction in negotiations. Sellers often feel insulted by low offers because they are not just negotiating over an object's market value, they are negotiating over a part of their personal history. Marketers exploit this by using try-before-you-buy strategies and free trials. Once a product is in your home and you begin to experience a sense of ownership, giving it back becomes much harder. To counteract this bias, you must practice mental detachment. Before selling something, ask yourself a critical question. If I didn't own this, what would I be willing to pay for it today? This shift in perspective can help you see your possessions with the clear, objective eyes of a buyer. 27. The peak of Mount Stupid. Have you ever met someone who is shockingly incompetent at something, yet possesses an unshakable, almost breathtaking, level of confidence in their own abilities? Conversely, have you known a true expert, a brilliant and highly skilled individual, who is plagued by self-doubt and constantly underestimates their own talent? This paradoxical relationship between competence and confidence is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Duh. It is the psychological phenomenon where people with low ability in a particular domain tend to overestimate their competence, while those with high ability tend to underestimate it. First studied by social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger in 1999, the effect reveals a fascinating and ironic truth. The very skills required to be good at something are often the same skills required to recognize that you are not good at it. In other words, incompetent people don't just lack the necessary skills. They lack the metacognitive ability, the ability to think about their own thinking, to realize their own shortcomings. They don't know what they don't know. As a result, they mistake their surface-level knowledge for deep expertise and confidently reside at the top of what Dunning and Kruger humorously call Mount Stupid. This explains why an amateur who has watched a few YouTube videos on a subject might suddenly believe they know as much as a professional with decades of experience. It's why someone who has skimmed a few articles on economics or medicine might confidently argue with experts. They have learned just enough to feel competent, but not enough to understand the vast scope of their own ignorance. On the other side of the spectrum, true experts have a deep and nuanced understanding of their field. They are acutely aware of the complexities, the exceptions to the rule, and how much there is still to learn. This vast knowledge gives them a more accurate, and often more humble, perspective on their own abilities. They also fall victim to a form of the false consensus effect, mistakenly assuming that if a task is easy for them, it must be just as easy for everyone else. They downplay their expertise, thinking, if I can do this, it must not be that impressive. This can lead to imposter syndrome, where highly accomplished individuals live with a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a dangerous force in society, as it allows overconfident but incompetent individuals to rise to positions of power, while knowledgeable experts may hold back. The path to wisdom, as Dunning and Kruger's research suggests, begins with humility. The best way to counteract this effect is to cultivate a habit of continuous learning and to actively seek out constructive criticism. If you find yourself feeling absolutely certain about something, it may be a sign that you have more to learn. True expertise is not marked by the absence of doubt, but by the understanding of its necessity. 28. The myth of the mirror. Have you ever shared a strong opinion on a political issue, a favorite movie, or even a moral dilemma, only to be genuinely shocked when you discover that many people you consider reasonable and intelligent, feel the complete opposite? You might find yourself thinking, how could they not see it my way? It's just common sense. This powerful and often misleading assumption that our own beliefs, values, and habits are the normal and widely accepted ones is known as the false consensus effect. It is the cognitive bias that leads us to overestimate the degree to which other people agree with us. The brain uses our own perspective as the default reference point for judging the world. We live our lives inside our own heads, so we naturally assume that our way of thinking is the standard. This isn't necessarily a sign of arrogance. It's a cognitive shortcut. It's easier to assume that others are like us than to engage in the complex mental work of imagining vastly different perspectives. This bias is powerfully reinforced by our social environments. We tend to spend most of our time with like-minded individuals. Our friends, family, and the online communities we join often share and validate our views. This creates a social echo chamber where our beliefs are constantly reflected back at us, making it seem as though they are the majority opinion, even if they are a minority view in the broader population. If everyone in your social media feed is outraged about a particular issue, it's easy to believe that the entire world is equally outraged. The false consensus effect distorts our perception in several significant ways. It can lead to social misunderstandings, where we misjudge others' intentions because we assume they are operating from the same set of beliefs as we are. It is a major fuel for political polarization. When people on both sides of an issue are convinced that most reasonable people agree with them, they become more entrenched in their own views and less willing to compromise or understand opposing perspectives. This bias also affects our behavior. Studies have shown that people are more likely to engage in risky or unethical behavior if they believe that many others would do the same in that situation. If someone believes that most people would cheat on their taxes if they could get away with it, they are more likely to justify cheating themselves. To counteract this bias, we must actively and intentionally seek out different perspectives. We must make a conscious effort to step outside our echo chambers and engage with people who think differently. We have to ask ourselves a crucial question. Is my belief actually widespread, or am I just surrounded by mirrors? This practice fosters humility, empathy, and a more accurate understanding of the complex and diverse world we live in. 29. The delusion of a fair universe. Deep down, most people want to believe in a world that makes sense. A world where good deeds are rewarded and bad deeds are punished. We crave a universe governed by fairness and cosmic justice. This powerful, comforting, and often dangerous belief is known as the just world hypothesis, or the just world fallacy. It is the cognitive bias that leads us to assume that people get what they deserve, that victims must have done something to warrant their misfortune, and that successful people must be inherently good and deserving of their rewards. While this belief can provide a sense of order and control, it often comes at a terrible cost, a lack of empathy and a tendency to blame the victim. This bias is deeply ingrained in our thinking because it serves as a psychological defense mechanism. The world can be a frighteningly random and unfair place. Good people get sick, hardworking people lose their jobs, and innocent people become victims of crime. This reality is unsettling because it means that misfortune could strike any of us at any time, without reason. The just world hypothesis protects us from this anxiety. By believing that the world is fair, we can delude ourselves into thinking that as long as we are good, hardworking, and careful, we will be safe from harm. The darkest consequence of this bias is victim blaming. When we hear about a tragedy, our brain, seeking to maintain its belief in a just world, scrambles for a reason why the victim deserved their fate. When someone's house is robbed, we might think, they probably should have had a better security system. When someone is scammed, we might say, they should have been more careful. When a person is assaulted, some might ask what they were wearing, or why they were in that location, as if their actions invited the attack. These rationalizations are not necessarily born from cruelty, but from a desperate, subconscious need to distance ourselves from the victim's fate and reassure ourselves that such a thing could never happen to us. The just world fallacy also distorts our perception of success and failure. We often assume that wealthy and successful individuals must have worked harder or been more deserving than those who struggle. This leads to the false and harmful belief that poverty is a result of laziness or moral failure, when in reality, it is often a product of systemic factors, bad luck, and a lack of opportunity. This mindset makes people less likely to support social safety nets or policies aimed at helping the disadvantaged, as they assume that everyone's situation is solely a result of their own actions. To counteract this bias, we must consciously embrace a more complex and compassionate worldview. We must recognize that life is not always fair, that luck plays a significant role, and that people's circumstances are often shaped by forces far beyond their control. 30. The power of pure belief. Imagine you are suffering from chronic headaches. You enroll in a clinical trial for a powerful new painkiller. You are given a pill, and within an hour, your headache begins to fade. You feel a profound sense of relief and are convinced the new drug is a miracle. Later, the doctors reveal a startling truth. You were in the control group. The pill you took contained nothing but sugar. This remarkable phenomenon, where a fake treatment can produce real, tangible, physiological results, is known as the placebo effect. It is a powerful testament to the incredible connection between the mind and the body, demonstrating that the mere belief in a cure can be a cure in itself. The placebo effect is not just all in your head, in the sense of being imaginary. The improvements are real and measurable. When a person believes they are receiving an effective treatment, their brain can trigger the release of its own natural painkillers, like endorphins. It can reduce stress hormones like cortisol, lower blood pressure, and even influence immune responses. The expectation of healing becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The brain, convinced that help is on the way, activates its own internal pharmacy to produce the very results it expects. This effect is so potent that it is the gold standard against which all new drugs must be tested. For a new medication to be approved, it must prove that it works significantly better than a placebo. In many trials, especially for conditions like chronic pain, depression, and anxiety, placebos can be surprisingly effective, with a significant percentage of patients in the control group reporting a reduction in their symptoms. The power of the placebo is not in the pill, but in the ritual and symbolism surrounding it. The authority of the doctor in a white coat, the clinical setting, the act of taking a pill, all of these prime the brain to expect a positive outcome. Marketers have long understood how to exploit this effect in consumer goods. We often perceive more expensive products as being higher quality, and this expectation can actually change our experience of them. In blind taste tests, people often can't tell the difference between a cheap wine and an expensive one. But when the price tag is visible, they consistently report that the expensive wine tastes better. The high price acts as a placebo, creating the expectation of quality, which in turn enhances the sensory experience. The same is true for skincare, electronics, and countless other products where branding and price create an illusion of superiority. However, the placebo effect also has a dark twin, the nocebo effect, where the negative expectation of harm can cause real, negative symptoms. If a patient is told a sugar pill has strong side effects, they are more likely to experience them. This demonstrates that our beliefs are a double-edged sword. They can be a powerful tool for healing and improvement, but they can also create suffering. By understanding this, you can learn to harness the power of positive expectation in your own life. Recognizing that your mindset is one of the most powerful tools you have for shaping your well-being. 31. The poison of expectation. Just as the power of positive belief can manifest real healing through the placebo effect, the expectation of harm can create real, tangible sickness. This is the nocebo effect, the placebo's sinister and often overlooked twin. It is the psychological and physiological phenomenon where negative expectations about a treatment or situation can lead to the experience of negative symptoms, even when the substance or situation is completely harmless. While the placebo effect tricks the brain into healing, the nocebo effect convinces the body that it is being poisoned, triggering a cascade of real, negative physical responses. This effect is a common and problematic variable in medicine. If a doctor warns a patient that a new medication may cause severe side effects like headaches or nausea, the patient becomes significantly more likely to experience those exact symptoms, even if they are given a simple sugar pill. In clinical trials, a substantial number of participants in the placebo group often drop out due to adverse reactions they attribute to the drug. Their belief alone is powerful enough to cause genuine physical distress. Their brain, primed by the expectation of harm, interprets any minor, unrelated physical sensation, a slight stomach cramp, a fleeting headache, as evidence that the negative prediction is coming true, which amplifies the sensation into a full-blown symptom. The nocebo effect is not just limited to medical treatments. It permeates our daily lives. If someone believes they are allergic to a certain food, they might develop hives or nausea simply from the thought of eating it, even if no allergen is present. If a news report creates widespread panic about a new mystery illness, some people will begin to experience real, psychosomatic symptoms that match the description. Fear and anxiety are the primary fuel for the nocebo effect. When you constantly worry about getting sick, feeling pain, or experiencing a negative outcome, your brain primes the body to manifest those symptoms. Stress hormones like cortisol flood your system, increasing your sensitivity to pain, suppressing immune function, and making even small discomforts feel overwhelming. Marketers and media can weaponize this effect. Advertisements for supplements or cleaning products often create anxiety by highlighting the hidden dangers and invisible threats all around us, making us feel vulnerable and more likely to buy their product for protection. Skincare ads focus on the damaging effects of aging, making people feel insecure about wrinkles they hadn't even noticed before. To counteract the nocebo effect, you must become a conscious curator of your expectations. When you hear a negative prediction, challenge it. Remind yourself that expectations can shape reality. By focusing on neutral or positive possibilities and refusing to let fear dictate your physical reality, you can disarm the poison of negative belief. 32. The comfort of the sand. When faced with a looming financial crisis, an unsettling health symptom, or a deteriorating relationship, a strange and deeply human instinct often takes over, the urge to look away. This is the ostrich effect, a cognitive bias where people actively avoid negative or threatening information in the hope that ignoring it will make it go away. The name is derived from the popular but false myth that ostriches bury their heads in the sand to avoid danger. While real ostriches don't do this, humans do it all the time, choosing the temporary comfort of ignorance over the stressful reality of confronting a problem, even when avoidance makes the situation far worse in the long run. This effect is rampant in financial behavior. Many people will deliberately avoid checking their bank account balances after a month of heavy spending. They will refuse to open their credit card statements or look at their investment portfolio during a market downturn. This avoidance doesn't change the numbers on the page, but it provides a short-term psychological relief from the anxiety of facing the truth. However, this willful ignorance prevents them from taking corrective action, like adjusting their budget or rebalancing their portfolio, often leading to much greater financial damage down the line. Health is another area where the ostrich effect can have devastating consequences. An individual experiencing a persistent, worrying symptom might put off seeing a doctor for weeks or even months, not because they think it's nothing, but because they are terrified of what they might find out. They ignore the warning signs, hoping they will simply disappear. This delay in seeking medical attention can allow a treatable condition to become a life-threatening one. The temporary peace of mind gained by avoiding the doctor's office comes at the catastrophic cost of their long-term health. The same pattern appears in relationships and workplaces. We avoid difficult but necessary conversations because we fear confrontation. A partner might ignore clear signs of infidelity, or an employee might avoid addressing a conflict with a colleague, hoping the problem will resolve itself. But problems, when ignored, don't disappear. They fester. Unresolved issues turn into deep-seated resentment, communication breaks down, and the relationship ultimately fails. The ostrich effect is a form of short-term emotional regulation that often leads to long-term disaster. Overcoming it requires a conscious act of courage. It means reframing problems not as threats to be feared, but as challenges to be met. It requires embracing the uncomfortable truth that while facing reality can be painful in the short term, running from it is always more destructive in the end. 33. The prophet of the past. After a surprising political election, a stock market crash, or even a dramatic breakup, a familiar chorus of voices inevitably emerges, all claiming the same thing. I knew it all along. This powerful, deceptive feeling that we could have predicted an outcome after it has already happened is known as hindsight bias. It is the psychological illusion that makes past events seem far more predictable and less surprising than they actually were. This bias doesn't just make us feel smarter. It fundamentally distorts our memory, causing us to reconstruct our past beliefs to align with our present knowledge. Hindsight bias works because our brain is a natural storyteller. After an event unfolds, it's easy to look back and connect the dots in reverse. We can clearly see the chain of cause and effect that led to the outcome, and this clarity makes the sequence feel logical and inevitable. The genuine randomness, uncertainty, and contradictory information that existed before the event are mentally erased. In hindsight, the chaotic present is transformed into an orderly, predictable past. You aren't just misremembering. Your brain is actively rewriting your memory to create a more coherent, but false, narrative in which you were a shrewd observer who saw it coming. This effect is visible everywhere. After a sports team pulls off an unexpected victory, fans will often point to a specific moment or player and say, "That's when I knew they were going to win," even if they were filled with doubt during the game. Investors who lose money in a market crash will often believe they saw the warning signs and should have sold earlier, forgetting that at the time, those signs were buried in a sea of conflicting data. In relationships, after a partner leaves, people often reinterpret past conversations and events as obvious red flags, even though they were fully invested and happy at the time. The danger of hindsight bias is that it creates a dangerous overconfidence in our ability to predict the future. If we falsely believe we have a good track record of knowing what was going to happen, we become less likely to learn from our mistakes and more likely to take unwise risks in the future. it also makes us harsher judges of others. When we look at someone else's failure, hindsight bias makes it seem like the outcome was obvious, and that they should have seen it coming, leading to unfair blame and a lack of empathy for the genuine uncertainty they faced. To counteract this bias, it helps to keep a journal of your predictions and thoughts before an event happens. This creates a written record of your actual state of mind, preventing your memory from playing tricks on you. It forces you to acknowledge that the world is far more unpredictable than it appears in the rearview mirror. 34. The sweet labor of creation. Why does a simple, often wobbly piece of furniture that you assembled yourself bring you more satisfaction than a professionally built, higher quality piece? Why does a home-cooked meal, even with its imperfections, often feel more special than a dish from a fine dining restaurant? The answer lies in the IKEA effect, a cognitive bias, where we place a disproportionately high value on things that we have partially or fully created ourselves. The effort we invest in building something creates a powerful psychological attachment, making the final product feel more valuable to us, even if it is objectively inferior. The effect is named after the iconic Swedish furniture company, IKEA, whose business model relies on customers assembling their own products. Behavioral economists Michael Norton, Daniel Moshon, and Dan Ariely, who first identified and studied this bias, found that participants were willing to pay significantly more for IKEA boxes they had assembled themselves compared to identical, pre-assembled boxes. The labor itself, even if it was frustrating and difficult, added a layer of subjective value. The researchers concluded that labor leads to love. By investing our own effort, we imbue the object with a part of ourselves, creating a sense of pride, competence, and ownership that a store-bought item simply cannot replicate. This isn't just about furniture. The IKEA effect applies to anything we personally invest effort into. A custom-built computer, a hand-knitted scarf, or even a personalized playlist feels more valuable because of the creative labor involved. Companies have learned to leverage this effect to increase customer engagement and loyalty. Build your own meal kits, customizable products from sneakers to cars, and DI project kits all tap into this desire to be a co-creator. When consumers are involved in the process, they feel more connected to the final product and are more satisfied with their purchase, even if an expert could have done it faster and better. However, the IKEA effect has a significant downside. Because we become so attached to what we create, we may become blind to its flaws. We overvalue our own work and can become resistant to valid criticism. A writer who has labored over a novel may struggle to accept feedback from an editor. An entrepreneur who built a company from scratch may refuse to pivot away from a failing strategy because they are too personally invested. This bias can lead to stubbornness and a failure to recognize when it's time to abandon a project. To find the right balance, we must recognize that our effort does not always equal objective value. While it's important to take pride in our creations, we must also be willing to seek and accept outside perspectives, ensuring that our love for our own labor doesn't blind us to the path of improvement. 35. The trap of knowing. Once you become an expert in something, a strange and frustrating thing happens. You forget what it was like to be a beginner. The complex concepts, technical jargon, and nuanced skills that you have mastered now feel simple, obvious, and intuitive. This makes it incredibly difficult to explain those ideas to someone who is just starting out. This is the curse of knowledge, a pervasive cognitive bias that makes it hard for experts to put themselves in the shoes of novices and communicate their knowledge effectively. This effect happens because knowledge fundamentally rewires the brain. Once you've learned a concept, the neural pathways associated with that information become strong and efficient. You can no longer access the before state of your mind, the state of confusion and unfamiliarity that a beginner experiences. You can't unknow what you know. This creates a massive empathy gap. A brilliant mathematics professor might struggle to understand why their students can't grasp a seemingly simple algebraic concept. A seasoned software engineer might use a string of acronyms and technical terms, assuming everyone in the room understands them. A doctor might explain a diagnosis using medical jargon, leaving the patient more confused and frightened than before. A classic experiment by Stanford graduate student Elizabeth Newton in 1990 perfectly demonstrated this effect. She divided participants into two groups, tappers and listeners. The tappers were asked to tap out the rhythm of a well-known song, like Happy Birthday, on a table. The listener's job was to guess the song. The tappers predicted that the listeners would guess correctly about 50% of the time. After all, the melody was playing perfectly inside their own heads as they tapped. The reality, the listeners guessed correctly only 2.5% of the time. The tappers were cursed by their own knowledge. They couldn't imagine what it was like to hear only a series of disconnected taps without the accompanying melody. The curse of knowledge is a major barrier to effective communication in teaching, leadership, and even personal relationships. Managers often give vague instructions, assuming their employees have the same background context they do. People in arguments often fail to explain their perspective clearly, assuming their reasoning is self-evident. To overcome this curse, you must practice a form of radical empathy. You must consciously force yourself to remember the struggle of learning. Use simple language, avoid jargon, and create concrete analogies that connect the new, complex idea to something the listener already understands. Check for understanding frequently. Great communicators are not just experts in their field. They are experts at remembering the journey from ignorance to knowledge. 36. The primacy of first and last. When you are presented with a list of information, whether it's a grocery list, a series of presentations, or the key points of an argument, your brain doesn't remember all the items equally. You are far more likely to recall the items at the very beginning and the very end of the list, while the information in the middle tends to get lost in a cognitive fog. This predictable pattern of memory is known as the serial position effect. It is a fundamental memory bias that is composed of two distinct but related phenomena: the primacy effect and the recency effect. The primacy effect explains our strong recall for the first items in a series. When you first start receiving information, your attention is fresh and undivided. The initial items have the best chance to be rehearsed and transferred from your short-term memory into your more stable, long-term memory. This is why a strong opening statement in a speech or a powerful first impression in a job interview is so critical. The first pieces of information you provide act as an anchor, framing the entire experience and becoming more deeply encoded in the listener's mind. The recency effect, on the other hand, explains our strong recall for the last items in a series. By the time you get to the end of a list, the final items are the most recent information your brain has processed. They are still fresh and active in your short-term auditory or sensory memory, making them easily accessible for immediate recall. This is why a powerful closing statement, a memorable final slide, or a strong final handshake can leave a lasting impression. The last thing you say or do is what sticks in the other person's mind as they walk away. This effect has major implications for anyone trying to communicate effectively. Advertisers know that the most crucial information, the brand name and the call to action, should be placed at the beginning and end of a commercial. The fun, flashy content can go in the middle. Public speakers and politicians are taught to structure their speeches with a powerful opening to grab the audience's attention, and a memorable conclusion to ensure their key message is what people remember. Even in studying, it's more effective to focus extra effort on the material in the middle of a chapter, as that's where your memory is naturally weakest. In a job interview, this bias means that the first and last candidates interviewed often have a slight advantage, as they are more likely to be remembered clearly by the hiring manager. By understanding this predictable glitch in our memory, you can strategically structure your communication to ensure that your most important ideas are the ones that are never forgotten. 37. The pattern-hungry brain. Your brain is a relentless pattern-seeking machine. It is constantly scanning the chaotic flood of sensory data around you, desperately trying to find connections, meaning, and relevance. This is an essential survival skill. but it also makes you susceptible to a peculiar cognitive glitch. The frequency illusion, also known as the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. This is the experience of encountering a new piece of information, a word, a concept, a name, and then suddenly seeing it everywhere you look. It feels like the world has changed overnight, but in reality, it is only your perception that has been altered. This illusion is the result of a powerful 1-2 punch of cognitive processes. The first is selective attention. Your brain simply cannot pay attention to everything. It must filter out billions of bits of information every second to focus on what matters for your current goals and interests. This filtering mechanism is largely unconscious. When you learn something new, you essentially hand your brain a new search term. For example, if you learn about the architectural style of brutalism, you have updated your brain's filter. Suddenly, your subconscious starts flagging every instance of brutalist architecture you drive past. Those buildings were always there, but they were previously invisible to you because your brain had no reason to tag them as significant. The second process is confirmation bias, which takes the results of your newly tuned filter and weaves them into a meaningful narrative. Each time you spot another brutalist building, your brain doesn't just register it as a data point. It interprets it as confirmation of a pattern. Wow, brutalism really is everywhere. This reinforces the feeling that the frequency of the thing has objectively increased, rather than just your awareness of it. This pattern-hungry nature of our brain is why trends seem to explode out of nowhere. A new fashion style or slang word might have been simmering in a subculture for months, but the moment it enters your awareness, the frequency illusion makes it feel like an overnight sensation. Marketers leverage this by creating multi-platform ad campaigns. Once you see an ad for a new phone, your brain's filter is activated, and you start noticing it in articles, on billboards, and in people's hands, creating the illusion of a massive, organic trend. Understanding this effect is crucial for critical thinking. It reminds us that our experience of the world is not an objective reality, but a subjective one, curated by the patterns our brain is currently hungry to find. 38. When seeing is hearing, your brain is not a passive receiver of information. It is an active and often aggressive interpreter of reality. It constantly blends inputs from your different senses to create a single coherent experience of the world. But what happens when those senses contradict each other? The result is a bizarre and fascinating sensory illusion known as the McGurk effect, which reveals that what you see can completely override and change what you hear. Discovered by psychologist Harry McGurk in the 1970s, the effect is best demonstrated through a simple but mind-bending experiment. Imagine you are listening to a clear audio recording of a person repeatedly saying the sound ba ba ba. It's unambiguous. Now, you watch a video of the same person, but the video has been altered. While the audio is still saying ba ba ba, the person's lip movements on the screen are clearly articulating the sound ga ga ga. Suddenly, your brain is faced with a conflict. Your ears are hearing ba, but your eyes are seeing gie. What happens next is remarkable. For most people, the brain doesn't get confused. It makes a decisive, albeit incorrect, choice. It splits the difference, and you hear a completely different sound, da da da. If the visual is changed to someone mouthing fa fa fa, while the ba 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 audio continues, your brain will override the sound entirely, and you will confidently hear fa fa fa. Your brain trusts your eyes more than your ears, and creates a third, synthesized reality to resolve the sensory conflict. The McGurk effect is not just a quirky laboratory trick. It happens constantly in our daily lives. It's why it's so much easier to understand someone in a noisy environment if you can see their face. Your brain uses the visual cues from their lip movements to fill in the gaps in the sound. It's also why badly dubbed foreign films can feel so jarring. The mismatch between the actors' lip movements and the dubbed audio creates a constant sensory conflict that our brains struggle to resolve. Subtitles can also create a mild version of this effect. If the words on the screen don't perfectly match the spoken dialogue, your perception of what was said can be subtly altered. This illusion is a profound demonstration that our perception is a construction, not a recording. We don't experience the world as it is. We experience the version of it that our brain has assembled for us based on a fusion of sensory inputs, context, and expectations. It's a humbling reminder that what we see and hear is not always the truth, but rather our brain's best guess. 39. The vague prophecies of the self. You have a need for other people to like and admire you, yet you tend to be critical of yourself. While you have some personality weaknesses, you are generally able to compensate for them. You have a great deal of unused capacity that you have not turned to your advantage. Does this sound like a uniquely accurate description of you? The chances are it does. But this isn't a personalized insight. It's a classic example of a Barnum statement, a vague, generalized assertion that feels deeply personal, but could apply to almost anyone. The tendency for people to accept these generic descriptions as tailored insights into their own character is known as the Barnum effect. This cognitive bias explains the enduring appeal of horoscopes, fortune tellers, pop psychology personality quizzes, and even vague compliments. The name comes from the famous 19th century showman P.T. Barnum, who was known for his belief that a successful circus must have a little something for everybody. Similarly, Barnum statements are crafted to be so universally applicable that everyone can find a piece of themselves in them. The effect was first demonstrated in a classic 1948 experiment by psychologist Bertram Forer. He gave his students a personality test, and then, a week later, handed each of them what he claimed was their unique, individualized personality analysis. In reality, he gave every single student the exact same list of generic statements he had cobbled together from various horoscopes. He then asked the students to rate the accuracy of their analysis on a scale of 0 to 5. The average rating was a stunning 4.26, with many students convinced that the description was eerily precise. The Barnum effect works because our brains are hungry for self-knowledge and are wired to find patterns and meaning. When we read a vague statement like, "At times you are extroverted and sociable, while at other times you are introverted and reserved," our brain engages in a process of subjective validation. We actively search our memories for examples that confirm the statement and conveniently ignore all the times it wasn't true. We fill in the gaps, projecting our own experiences onto the generic text, which makes it feel incredibly personal. This is the core technique used by cold readers, psychics, and mentalists. They throw out a series of high-probability statements and let the subject do the work of finding the personal connection. Understanding the Barnum effect is a crucial step toward developing genuine self-awareness. It teaches us to be skeptical of vague flattery and to seek out specific evidence-based insights rather than falling for the comforting but empty prophecies that could be written for anyone. 40. The scripts we write for reality. What if your deepest beliefs about the future were not just predictions, but scripts? What if the expectations you hold about yourself, about others, and about the world could actively shape reality to make those expectations come true? This powerful and sometimes frightening phenomenon is known as the self-fulfilling prophecy. It is a psychological dynamic where a person's belief or expectation, whether true or false, influences their behavior in a way that ultimately causes the expectation to be realized. In essence, the prediction becomes the cause. The concept was famously demonstrated in the Oak School experiment by Robert Rosenthal, the same study that illustrated the Pygmalion effect. When teachers were led to believe that certain randomly chosen students were academic bloomers, their expectation became a prophecy. They unconsciously changed their behavior, offering more encouragement, challenges, and feedback, which in turn caused the students' performance to improve, thus fulfilling the initial, and originally false, expectation. The teachers didn't just predict success, they helped create it. This effect works in both positive and negative directions, and permeates every area of our lives. If you go into a job interview believing, "I'm not qualified for this, I'm going to fail," you will likely behave in ways that confirm that belief. You might appear nervous, answer questions with low confidence, and fail to build rapport. The interviewer's negative response will then prove your initial belief was correct. Conversely, if you believe, "I am the right person for this job," you will project confidence, speak with conviction, and engage more positively, dramatically increasing your chances of success. The self-fulfilling prophecy is especially potent in relationships. If a person enters a relationship with the deep-seated belief that they will eventually be betrayed, they may become overly suspicious, controlling, or emotionally distant. This behavior can suffocate the relationship, pushing their partner away and ultimately causing the very abandonment they feared. Their belief created the reality they were trying to avoid. On the other hand, someone who expects their relationship to be built on trust and mutual respect will behave in ways that foster those qualities, making a healthy, lasting bond more likely. The most dangerous aspect of this phenomenon is its ability to reinforce negative societal stereotypes. When a group is repeatedly told they are less capable or less intelligent, those external expectations can be internalized, affecting confidence, ambition, and creating real barriers to achievement. The first step to breaking a negative cycle, or creating a positive one, is to examine your own expectations. If you believe a negative outcome is inevitable, ask yourself, are my own actions and beliefs contributing to this script? By consciously changing your expectations, you can begin to rewrite the role you play, and in doing so, change the outcome of the entire story. 41. The illusion of the yardstick. How do we know if something is heavy, expensive, or bright? The truth is, we don't. Not in an absolute sense. Our brains lack an internal objective yardstick for value. Instead, we understand the world through a series of constant, automatic, and often flawed comparisons. This is the foundation of the contrast principle, a powerful psychological effect where our perception of something is dramatically altered by whatever we experienced immediately before it. The value we assign is not based on intrinsic qualities, but on its relationship to the preceding anchor point. If you lift a heavy dumbbell at the gym, and then immediately pick up a lighter one, the second dumbbell will feel significantly lighter than it actually is. Your brain doesn't judge its weight in isolation. It judges it in contrast to the heavy weight you just put down. This principle of perceptual contrast is a fundamental aspect of how we process reality, and it is masterfully exploited in the world of persuasion and sales. A real estate agent will often intentionally show you an overpriced, undesirable decoy house first. The house might be in a bad neighborhood or need significant repairs. After that experience, the next house they show you, the one they actually want to sell, will seem like a fantastic bargain by comparison, even if it is still objectively overpriced. Your perception has been skewed by the initial, negative contrast. Similarly, a car salesperson will try to sell you on the high base price of the car first. Once you've mentally anchored to a $40,000 price tag, the additional $2,000 for leather seats or a sound system seems like a minor, trivial expense. This effect extends beyond monetary value. It shapes our perception of people. A moderately attractive person will seem more attractive if they are standing next to someone less attractive. A job candidate with solid qualifications will appear like a superstar if they are interviewed immediately after a series of terrible candidates. The candidate's skills haven't changed, but the frame of comparison has. We even do this to ourselves. If you compare your current progress to the ultimate goal, you might feel discouraged. But if you compare your progress to where you started, you will likely feel motivated and successful. To protect yourself from being manipulated by the contrast principle, you must learn to decouple your judgments. When making a decision, consciously force yourself to evaluate the option on its own merits. Ask the critical question, ignoring what I just saw or heard, is this a good deal, a good choice in and of itself? By breaking the chain of comparison, you can assess an option's true value, not just its perceived value relative to a cleverly chosen predecessor. 42. The truth By 1,000 cuts, how does an idea, whether true or false, move from being a questionable claim to an accepted piece of common knowledge? Often, it's not through evidence or logical argument, but through a brute force psychological tactic, repetition persuasion. This is the principle that the more frequently people are exposed to a statement, the more credible and truthful they perceive it to be. It's a close cousin of the illusory truth effect, but its focus is on the mechanism of persuasion itself. Repetition doesn't just make a statement feel familiar. It actively wears down our critical thinking and manufactures a sense of consensus. This works because of a concept called cognitive fluency. Our brains are lazy and prefer things that are easy to process. When we hear a statement for the first time, we have to engage our analytical mind to evaluate it. This takes effort. But the 5th or 10th time we hear it, the neural pathway is well worn. The information is processed quickly and effortlessly. Our brain mistakes this ease of processing for a sign of credibility. The logic is flawed but automatic. If this is so easy to recall and understand, it must be true. Repetition acts like a cognitive lubricant, allowing an idea to slide past our critical faculties without friction. Politicians have built entire careers on this principle. They distill complex policy issues into simple, emotionally charged slogans. Make America great again. Yes, we can. Stronger together. And repeat them endlessly across speeches, ads, and media appearances. The goal isn't to win a debate. It's to achieve a state of message saturation, where the slogan becomes so familiar that it feels like an undeniable truth. Advertisers do the same with brand names and jingles. The purpose of a catchy jingle is not to provide information, but to create a memorable, repetitive loop that embeds the brand in your subconscious. This effect is particularly dangerous in the age of misinformation. A false rumor or a conspiracy theory, if repeated often enough by multiple sources on social media, can begin to feel like a well-established fact. Each repetition acts as a small cut, slowly bleeding the truth out of the narrative. Even if we have evidence to the contrary, the sheer volume of repetition can create a powerful feeling of doubt. This also applies to our internal monologue. If you repeatedly tell yourself negative self-talk like, "I'm not good enough," your brain will begin to accept it as a core truth. Conversely, positive affirmations can leverage the same principle to rewire your belief system. To defend against this, you must treat familiarity with suspicion. When you hear an idea repeated, ask, is there diverse, verifiable evidence for this? Or is its only credential the fact that I've heard it 1,000 times? 43. The whiplash of the mind. Imagine you're walking down a street late at night when you hear rapid footsteps behind you. Your heart pounds, your muscles tense, and your mind is flooded with a singular, primal focus: danger. This is your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, triggering a fight-or-flight response. Now, imagine the person runs past you, just a harmless jogger. In that instant, a wave of profound relief washes over you. Your body relaxes, your mind goes momentarily blank, and you feel a strange sense of calm. It is in this precise moment of mental whiplash that you are at your most vulnerable and suggestible. This is the fear then relief technique, a powerful manipulation tactic where an induced state of fear is abruptly followed by a comforting resolution, making the target significantly more compliant. The technique works by intentionally disrupting our normal cognitive processes. When we are afraid, our rational mind, located in the prefrontal cortex, is essentially hijacked. Our focus narrows, and we are unable to think critically or logically. All our mental resources are dedicated to assessing and escaping the threat. When the threat is suddenly removed, the brain doesn't just snap back to normal. It experiences a temporary refractory period, a moment of disorientation and cognitive exhaustion. In this state of relief, our critical thinking defenses are still down, leaving us open to any suggestion that is presented as a path back to safety and normalcy. One of the classic examples of this is the good cop, bad cop routine. The bad cop induces fear and anxiety threatening dire consequences. Then, the good cop enters, removes the threat, and offers a simple, comforting solution. Just cooperate with me, and we can make all of this go away. The suspect, still reeling from the emotional whiplash, is far more likely to comply with the good cop's reasonable request. High-pressure sales tactics use the same script. A salesperson might warn you about a serious risk. If you don't buy this insurance, you could lose everything, creating a spike of fear. Then they offer an easy solution. But with this simple monthly payment, you'll be completely protected, making the purchase feel like an act of relief rather than a financial decision. Scam emails and phishing attempts are digital versions of this tactic. They start with a terrifying message: your account has been compromised. Then, they offer immediate relief. Click this link to secure your account now. In your state of fear-induced panic, you are less likely to notice the red flags and more likely to click the malicious link. To defend against this, you must learn to recognize when your fear is being manufactured. When you feel a sudden spike of anxiety followed by an easy solution, pause. Take a deep breath. Give your rational mind a moment to come back online. Ask yourself, is this threat real, or is it being used to rush me into a decision? 44. The ghost in the machine. Imagine you read a sensational headline-grabbing article online from a notoriously unreliable, biased blog. You read it, recognize the source is trash, and immediately dismiss the information as false. You move on with your day, confident in your critical thinking skills. But weeks later, you find yourself in a conversation about that same topic. You recall the sensational claim from the article and state it as a potential fact, but you can no longer remember where you heard it. The information, now untethered from its untrustworthy origin, feels strangely plausible. This delayed action persuasion is known as the sleeper effect, a psychological phenomenon where a message that was initially dismissed becomes more persuasive over time. The effect occurs because of a quirk in how our memory stores information. When we receive a message, we typically encode both the message itself and the context surrounding it, including the source. If the source is not credible, e.g., a known liar, a propaganda outlet, we attach a discounting cue to the memory. This cue tells our brain, remember this, but don't trust it. Initially, the discounting cue works perfectly, and we reject the message. However, over time, our memory for the context tends to fade faster than our memory for the message itself. This process is called source amnesia, the specific, detailed memory of where we heard the information decades. But the general, semantic memory of the information itself remains. As the link between the message and the negative discounting cue weakens and eventually breaks, the message is left floating in our memory like a ghost in the machine. When we recall it later, we remember the claim but not the reason we were supposed to distrust it. Freed from its tainted source, the message's persuasiveness increases. This is a primary reason why fake news and political propaganda are so effective, even among people who are initially skeptical. A campaign can spread a false, emotionally charged rumor about an opponent. Even if news outlets debunk it, the initial message has been planted. Over time, voters may forget the debunking and the unreliable source, but they will retain a vague, negative feeling associated with the candidate. The lie, given enough time, does its work. The sleeper effect is a subtle but powerful form of cognitive erosion. It shows that even when we think we are resisting misinformation, it can still seep into our belief system over time. The best defense is to be not just a critical consumer of information in the moment, but also a vigilant curator of your own memory. When you encounter a questionable claim from an unreliable source, don't just dismiss it. Make a conscious, active effort to associate the claim with its untrustworthy origin. By strengthening that discounting cue, you can help ensure that when the ghost of the message reappears later, you remember exactly why it's not to be trusted. 45. The invisible puppeteer. We like to believe that our thoughts, feelings, and actions are the product of our own conscious will. But what if your choices are being subtly and systematically influenced by invisible cues in your environment, all without your awareness? This is the reality of the priming effect, a fascinating psychological phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus unconsciously influences your response to a subsequent stimulus. These primes can be words, images, sounds, or even physical sensations, and they act like an invisible puppeteer, pulling the strings of your behavior from just below the surface of your conscious mind. Priming works because our brain is a massive, interconnected network of associations. When you see the word doctor, a whole constellation of related concepts is automatically activated in your mind. Nurse, hospital, sickness, health, stethoscope. This is called semantic priming. Because these concepts are now warmed up, you will be able to recognize or respond to them more quickly. If you see the word yellow, you will process the word banana faster than the word car. However, priming goes far beyond simple word association. It can influence complex social behavior. In a famous and controversial experiment, psychologists had participants unscramble sentences containing words associated with old age, such as Florida, wrinkle, sentimental, and bingo. Afterward, the participants were secretly timed as they walked down a hallway to leave. The results were remarkable. The participants who had been primed with elderly stereotypes walked significantly more slowly than a control group who had unscrambled neutral words. They had unconsciously adopted a behavior consistent with the prime, without having any idea they had done so. This effect is used pervasively in advertising and retail. The smell of fresh baked bread in a supermarket doesn't just make you hungry. It primes feelings of warmth, comfort, and home, which can make you a more relaxed and less price-conscious shopper. The slow, calming music in a high-end boutique is designed to make you browse longer and feel more contemplative, increasing the likelihood of a purchase. The color red in a sale sign can prime feelings of urgency and excitement, encouraging impulsive decisions. Even our own goals can be primed. If you are exposed to words related to achievement and success, you are more likely to persist longer on a difficult task. The priming effect is a humbling reminder that we are not the sole authors of our actions. Our environment is constantly whispering suggestions to our subconscious. To regain control, we must become more mindful of our surroundings. By noticing the music, the smells, the words, and the images around you, you can begin to see the strings of the invisible puppeteer and make more conscious, deliberate choices. 46. The treachery of memory. How do you remember your last vacation? You probably recall a few standout moments. The breathtaking view from a mountaintop, a particularly delicious meal, or the stressful chaos of a delayed flight. You also likely remember how you felt as it ended. What you almost certainly do not do is average out the pleasure or pain of every single moment to form a balanced conclusion. This is because our memory is a deeply biased and treacherous storyteller. It does not create a faithful record of our experiences. Instead, it summarizes them based on a simple, powerful, and often misleading cognitive shortcut known as the peak end rule. This rule, identified by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, dictates that our retrospective evaluation of an event is not determined by its duration, but almost exclusively by two single points in time. The most emotionally intense moment, the peak, whether positive or negative, and the very end. The actual length of the experience, and all the moderately pleasant or unpleasant moments in between, are almost entirely ignored in the final judgment. Kahneman famously distinguished between the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives through every moment, but it has no voice. The remembering self is the one that keeps score, tells the story, and makes future decisions. And the remembering self is ruthlessly efficient. It doesn't care about the whole story, only the highlights and the ending. In one classic experiment, Kahneman had participants submerge their hands in uncomfortably cold water. One group kept their hand in the water for 60 seconds. A second group kept their hand in the water for 90 seconds. But for the final 30 seconds, the temperature was raised by 1 degree. Still unpleasant, but less so. When asked which trial they would prefer to repeat, a significant majority chose the longer, 90-second trial. This is completely irrational from the perspective of the experiencing self, which suffered for 30 seconds longer. But for the remembering self, the 90-second trial had a less painful ending, and that improved memory was all that mattered. This bias shapes our memory of everything. A 2-hour movie that is mostly mediocre, but has a brilliant, shocking climax and a satisfying ending, will be remembered as a great film. A long, stable relationship that ends in a bitter, dramatic breakup will often be remembered as a painful failure, despite years of happiness. Smart businesses engineer experiences around this rule. Theme parks save the fireworks for the very end of the night, ensuring visitors leave with a strong, positive final memory. Restaurants might offer a free dessert or mint with the check, knowing that the final moments heavily influence the customer's overall review. Understanding this rule allows you to be a more accurate judge of your own past, and a more effective architect of future experiences for yourself and others. 47. The tyranny of the familiar. Why do so many people stick with their default cable provider, bank, or insurance company for years, even when they know better deals are available? Why do employees often resist a new, more efficient software system, preferring to cling to the old, clunky one they already know? The answer lies in the status quo bias, a powerful psychological tendency where we prefer to keep things the way they are rather than make a change. This bias reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. We are often more motivated by the desire to avoid the potential risks of change than we are by the prospect of a potential gain. The status quo bias is a potent cocktail of several other cognitive biases. First and foremost, it is driven by loss aversion. The current situation, the status quo, acts as our baseline. Any change from that baseline is perceived as a risk that could lead to a loss. Even if a new option is likely better, the possibility that it might be worse feels psychologically more threatening than the potential for improvement feels enticing. The fear of regret, the what if I make the wrong choice question, can be paralyzing, making an action feel like the safest option. Second, it is reinforced by the endowment effect. We irrationally overvalue what we already have, simply because it is ours. We are familiar with our current job, our current software, our current brand of coffee. This familiarity makes it feel more valuable and comfortable, even if we are consciously aware of its flaws. Change requires cognitive effort. It means researching new options, learning new systems, and adapting to new routines. Learning new systems and adapting to new routines. Our brain, being an energy conservation machine, naturally gravitates toward the path of least resistance, which is almost always to do nothing. Companies are experts at leveraging this inertia. Subscription services and gym memberships often count on the fact that once you've signed up, you are unlikely to go through the active effort of canceling, even if you stop using the service. Software companies make their product the default on a new computer, knowing that most users will never bother to switch. This bias can be a major obstacle to personal and organizational growth. It keeps us in unfulfilling jobs, unhealthy habits, and inefficient routines. To overcome it, you must actively challenge the default. Force yourself to compare the status quo to its alternatives, as if you were choosing from scratch. Ask the powerful question, knowing what I know now, if this wasn't my current situation, would I actively choose it today? This simple mental reset can break the spell of familiarity and open the door to progress. 48. The power of the pre-selected path. Imagine you sign up for a new online service. During the setup process, you are presented with a series of choices about privacy settings, notifications, and data sharing. Most of the boxes are already checked for you. What do? If you are like the vast majority of people, you will simply click accept and move on, without changing a single pre-selected option. This powerful tendency to stick with a choice that has been made for us is known as the default bias. It is a close cousin of the status quo bias, but it is specifically about the immense power of the preset option, revealing that we often prefer to make no choice at all than to actively choose. This bias works because every decision, no matter how small, requires mental energy. Choosing something new means reading the options, weighing the pros and cons, and considering the potential consequences. Since our brain is always looking for ways to conserve its limited cognitive resources, it often defaults to the path of least resistance. The default option is presented as the standard, the normal, and implicitly, the recommended choice. Accepting it requires zero effort, while changing it requires an active, conscious intervention. One of the most famous and impactful examples of this is in organ donation. In countries like Germany, where you have to actively opt in to be an organ donor, donation rates are often as low as 15%. However, in neighboring countries like Austria, where the system is presumed consent, meaning you are automatically enrolled as a donor, unless you actively opt out, donation rates are over 90%. The difference is not due to a massive cultural gap in altruism. It is almost entirely due to the power of the default setting. Most people in both countries are perfectly fine with being donors, but the effort required to change the pre-selected path is enough to stop them from acting. Governments and corporations, a field known as choice architecture, intentionally design defaults to nudge our behavior. Companies automatically enroll you in subscription renewals, knowing that the inertia of the default will keep you paying. Employers who automatically enroll their workers in retirement savings plans see dramatically higher participation rates than those who require employees to sign up manually. While this can be used for good, it can also be used to exploit our cognitive laziness. Technology companies often make the least private settings the default, knowing that few users will navigate the complex menus to change them. To counteract this, we must treat every default option not as a recommendation, but as just one of several choices. Ask yourself, is this option truly the best one for me? Or is it just the one that was chosen for me? By making an active choice, even if it's just to confirm the default, you reclaim control over your decisions. 49. The unspoken social debt. If a coworker buys you a coffee, you feel a subtle but distinct urge to buy them one next time. If a friend helps you move, you feel a deep-seated obligation to be there for them when they need help. This powerful, unwritten social contract is the reciprocity principle, one of the most fundamental and pervasive forces in human psychology. It is the tendency to feel compelled to repay, in kind, what another person has provided for us. This sense of future obligation is so deeply ingrained in our social fabric that it operates as an almost automatic reflex, making it one of the most potent tools of persuasion. This bias is not a learned behavior, it is a product of our evolution. In ancient societies, reciprocal altruism was essential for survival. Sharing resources, food, and protection created a web of mutual obligation that strengthened the entire tribe. If you helped someone today, you could count on them to help you tomorrow. Individuals who only took and never gave were quickly ostracized, a fate that often meant death. As a result, we have evolved to feel a genuine psychological discomfort with the feeling of being indebted to others. This principle is one of the cornerstones of influence, as famously outlined by psychologist Robert Cialdini. Businesses leverage it constantly. The free sample at a warehouse store is not just a chance to taste a product. It is a small gift that creates a subtle obligation to buy the full-sized item. Waiters who leave a mint or two with the check often receive a significantly larger tip, not because the candy was so good, but because the small, personalized gesture triggered the reciprocity instinct in the diner. Charities often send unsolicited gifts in the mail, like address labels or greeting cards, knowing that even an unwanted gift can create enough guilt to dramatically increase donation rates. However, this principle can also be manipulated for less noble purposes. A high-pressure salesperson might offer you a free consultation or a small perk to create a sense of obligation before they make their real request. Some people use this in personal relationships, performing calculated acts of kindness solely to create a social debt that they can cash in later, often making you feel guilty if you refuse. The key to navigating this is to distinguish between genuine acts of kindness and transactional gestures. When someone gives you something, accept it graciously. If it feels like a genuine gift, reciprocate in a way that feels natural and appropriate. But if you feel a sense of pressure, or that the gift came with invisible strings attached, you have the right to recognize it as a tactic. You are not obligated to participate in a transaction you didn't agree to. True reciprocity is the foundation of healthy relationships. Manipulated reciprocity is a tool of compliance. 50. The fiction of our past. We tend to think of our memories as perfect, high-fidelity recordings of the past, safely stored in our brain like video files on a hard drive. We believe that when we recall an event, we are simply playing back the recording. But decades of psychological research have revealed a shocking and deeply unsettling truth. This is a complete illusion. Memory is not a recording device. It is a storyteller. This is the foundation of the false memory effect, the psychological phenomenon where people can be convinced they remember things that never actually happened, or remember them in a way that is dramatically different from reality. Our memory is not a reproductive process. It is a reconstructive one. Each time you recall a past event, your brain doesn't just retrieve a static file. It actively rebuilds the memory from scattered fragments of information, and in the process, it fills in missing details, smooths over inconsistencies, and incorporates new, post-event information. This reconstruction is heavily influenced by our current beliefs, emotions, and suggestions from others. Over time, the original memory can become so distorted that it bears little resemblance to the actual event, yet we remember it with absolute, unwavering confidence. The pioneering work of psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has been instrumental in revealing how fragile and malleable memory is. In her classic Lost in the Mall experiment, she was able to convince a significant number of participants that they had a detailed memory of being lost in a shopping mall as a child, a completely fabricated event. By simply having a family member suggest the false story, the participants' brains constructed a plausible, detailed, and entirely false memory. In her studies on the misinformation effect, she showed how easily memory can be corrupted by leading questions. When witnesses to a simulated car accident were asked, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? They remembered the cars going faster and seeing broken glass that wasn't there, compared to witnesses who were asked the more neutral word, hit. This effect has profound implications for the legal system, as it demonstrates the unreliability of eyewitness testimony. It also explains personal and collective false memories, like the Mandela effect, where large groups of people share the same incorrect memory, such as believing Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. To protect yourself, it's crucial to treat your own memories with a degree of humility and skepticism. Corroborate important memories with factual evidence, written records, or photos when possible. Understand that the confidence you feel about a memory has no bearing on its accuracy. Our past is not a fixed landscape we can revisit. It is a story our brain tells itself, and that story is constantly being revised.